It's amazing because there were times that people had accused me of being a government agent or operative of some kind, because my version of what happened, which was my witness, didn't match theirs. So I'm kind of proud of that picture, because for a long time a lot of people even doubted whether I was there, and that's kind of the power of propaganda and the power of someone with an agenda. You could say something about the nicest person in town, and if it's bad enough, people want to believe it and spread it as quickly as possible. So, okay, I'm not really sure where to start here, so I guess we're going to start at the beginning. It's been a long time since I've been in front of an audience, and I thank you all for coming out. In the age where you guys don't even have to leave your houses, everything is on TV, you can stream whatever you want. You really don't know how much I appreciate you all coming out here to hear my version of events. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. So I'm going to start off with a little foundation. This is going to take a while, by the way, so I hope we got some time. I don't want to start too late, because I do want to get to questions. It's very important to me, because some of the best stuff comes from the questions that I forgot to mention. This is the original Mount Carmel and what it looked like. Now, the thing that a lot of people don't know about Mount Carmel, perhaps some of you do, is it's been there for about 50, 60 years, the community. It started with a guy named Victor Houteff, who came from California and bought some property around Lake Waco, and then he expanded into Axtell and bought the property that's in Axtell. That is what you see. I'll show you eventually what the building looked like before the conflagration. But Houteff, people considered him, my understanding is he branched off from the Seventh-day Adventist Church and formed the branch Davidians. And then after he died, a guy named Ben Roden took over. Now, the thing that's interesting, and that I've always found interesting about Mount Carmel, is the people out there believe that their leaders are inspired prophets. And so Houteff was considered a prophet to the people that were out there. And then when he took over, Ben couldn't just take over. You had to have a progressive truth. You had to be able to build off the foundation of the Seventh-day Adventist Church to the Branch Davidian, and then come up with a different name and form your own group. But the group had to believe you. Not as easy as it sounds. But anyway, so I can't remember what I don't know what Ben's message was, but I know what Lois's message was. Now, Lois was his wife. When Ben died, she took over the group. And when she took over the group, she started preaching the Holy Spirit feminine. She got this from Proverbs 8 and Proverbs 9, where the wisdom of God, the Holy Spirit, is speaking to man, telling them to listen to wisdom. I dwell with prudence. That when God was built the heaven and the earth, I was before him. I was always with him. So the belief is that the Holy Spirit is a real individual of the feminine aspect of God, and they are one together, like family on earth as it is in heaven. So she taught that, and that was a progressive enough truth for the people to stay with her. And then, as she was getting older, everyone thought Ben Roden, her son, was going to take over the group. But then Vernon Howell came onto the scene. And Vernon was someone who had read a lot of Ellen G. White's writings and then spent a lot of time studying and understanding Scripture. So when he came, some of the older people that were there tell me, he stuttered, no one thought he was too bright. He was very good at fixing things, and Lois kept him around. He showed up because I believe he was in Dallas and going to the Seventh-day Adventist Church there. And he asked someone, how come there's no prophets anymore in the world? How come there are no prophets? And one of the older ladies in the congregation said, I hear there's a prophet in Waco, dear. And so as soon as he heard that, he went and he met Lois. And apparently he was blown away with the history of Lois and that sect of the Davidians, if you will. And so through the course of time, Lois considered him to be the next successor. And so he was the prophet, she was the prophetess. They had an affair, and she got pregnant. She was a 60-year-old woman. So David would say that is, look, I mean, how much more evidence do you need than that, she had to reach menopause and now she's pregnant. So what happened later, and this all happened way before my time, guys. So I'm explaining to you the history from what I understand, from what I've talked to people and read. So because she got pregnant, that was a big sign for a lot of people, and they decided to stay and follow David's message. Then at some point, David went to Israel, and when he came back, he started teaching the 7 seals even more in depth. And basically you could take Genesis to Revelation and put it all together where you could understand it. And when he gave a study, it wasn't like any of the TV preachers I had ever seen or any of the churches that I went to. When he gave a study, it was like he lived it. It was like he lived the book. That's the best way I can briefly describe it. I'm not going to go into the scripture. I don't do that. But I could just tell you from my honest witness that that's how it appeared to me. Like he lived it, like he really understood it. It was phenomenal. But to get back to that part of the story, which, like I said, it's before my time, she ended up having a miscarriage, and when she did, a lot of the people left the group. Some people started following George, but most of the people stayed with David because of the progressive truth that he had. He got kicked off the property, and they ended up in a place called Palestine, Texas, in the middle of the woods, and they were living in buses, and they were living in tents. And then George Roden decided that he had to find out who was going to control the group. So he called David up. George Roden, this is such a crazy story, guys. George Roden went to the cemetery where many of the older Davidians were buried, and he dug up a body. And he called Koresh and he said, we're going to have a duel off. He who can raise this woman from the dead will be the next prophet. And David said, I don't think so, and went to the sheriff's department and said, isn't that corpse abuse? Isn't that illegal? So the sheriff's department said, you have to have pictures. We have to have evidence. So he went out on the property. We got some pictures, got some evidence, brought it back. And it was a closed casket. And they said that they needed pictures of the open casket. So he and some of the guys went out with some firearms, and George Roden saw them, opened fire. There was a gun battle. I'm going to wrap this up. This is before my time. Make a long story short, they all went to court. They all put down their guns when the cops came out, and they went in willingly into law enforcement, into jail. They were incarcerated. It was David and like 3 or 4 or 5 other guys, I think. They were incarcerated until it went to jury trial. Everyone was acquitted except for David. It was a hung jury. They couldn't make a decision on his fate. So he was released and everyone was released. George Roden ended up going to jail when he told the judge that if the judge did not rule in his favor, that God would curse him with AIDS and herpes. Not a very smart thing to say to a judge. So he went to jail, and then he ended up going to an insane asylum. He escaped twice, and I guess on the last time he escaped... No, he went to the insane asylum because he killed his best friend with an axe. So it's a pretty colorful, dark story, my friends. It's really quite crazy. But that's what happened. And then David ended up with the property, with control of the group, and then he just went out and started going to seminaries. See, he didn't just look for people that were like in Skid Row, and a lot of people have this impression that all of the people that were at Mount Carmel were just blind followers that just wanted to believe in something. So much more than that. I mean, there were people like Wayne Martin, who had Harvard-educated attorney, Steve Schneider, who taught comparative religions. There's some very brilliant people there. And some that, were just older and had been in this religion for their whole lives, and they just kept on going on with it. So there's a cornucopia of various peoples in between. But the people that I started to meet when I first went out there, I met David at a Guitar Center, him and Steve Schneider, and they were looking at some drum sets, and they asked me if I'd play. I sat down, I played for a couple, maybe like 30 seconds. I just went around the kit a couple times. They said, well, we're looking for a drummer. Are you interested? And I said, no. They handed me their card, and it said Messiah Productions on the front, had all this religious scripture on the back. And I said, I'm not looking to be in a Christian band, guys, but thank you very much. And that was it. I was going to walk out and never think of them again. But what happened was Steve said, well, Steve was dressed like a manager type, very well dressed, where David had a T-shirt and torn jeans. And Steve said, listen, we know something about the scripture that most people don't. It has something to do with the 7 seals. I've been all over the world with this guy. We've talked to preachers, rabbis, teachers, you name it. And we just want to know what the truth is. We want to know what the Bible really says. And that's it. And so I took their card and I walked away, and I just, I guess I called them within a couple days, and it just, something made me call them. I can't say what it was. is I was not looking for religion. I was not looking to get converted, and I certainly wasn't looking to be in a sect or a cult or, I mean, I lived, my music school was right down on the corner was the Scientology building. And every day we would walk by it and we'd see the kids come out all dressed the same, all the women, all the, girls in shorts, in skirts and the same top, all the guys dressed the same. It was just like, there was just something that didn't set well with me about that. It's like living in California, in Hollywood, I had a radar for that. I wasn't interested. But I've always wanted to know what the scripture really said. I would watch some of the TV preachers back in the 80s, and I just thought they were full of it. I didn't understand why people would send them their money. They didn't seem sincere to me at all. They seemed like snake oil salesmen. The ones that I watched, hope I don't offend anyone, but there was something different about their approach, and I liked the fact that they really wanted to know what the book said. So, make a long story short, I spent some time with getting to know them. Steve came over with Greg Summers and Jamie Casillo and some of the younger guys who were musicians, and they started to give me some studies, and some of the studies were, very interesting. The first studies were really about the kingdom to be set up, and that was on the back of their card. I'm going to show a slide of that first. Let me just go through this a little bit. Make sure I know how this works. So this is what Mount Carmel looked like originally. And you got that building there on the far right is the chapel. There's the hallway, and that other building protruding off it is that's the cafeteria area. So if you could picture what the building looked like when it burned, there was only one structure left standing, and that was the base of the cafeteria area, was the walk-in cooler. It was made out of concrete. But that's what the original building looked like, and everything else was developed onto it. Okay, the other hallways, the towers, all that was built off that. So there was a period of time where we took down all these little houses, and the first time I came to Mount Carmel back in 91 or 92, everything happened in 93, I think it was 91. That's what I saw, all these little houses in the middle of nowhere, cows everywhere. I think a deer passed by the bus the first time. And I was a Hollywood kid, and I'm like, what am I doing here? Where am I? It was crazy. I've never seen that much space, that many cows, much country, if you will. And then I saw these little houses, and I just went, oh my God, what did I do? What did I get myself into? But then, that's another aerial footage of it. I like the early stuff. It's an interesting history. If nothing else, this whole subject is fascinating. When I talked to the older people when I was first getting to know everyone, and they said, the prophets before, the people that were the divinities, they always talked about someone who would come and be able to reveal the book. And now we're with the guy that can reveal the book. So some of those people have been waiting for a decade for that person to come. And the other prophets talked about the seventh angel's message that would come. And there's David, who built off the foundation of everyone else, but then took it so much further. That, to me, is what's really fascinating. And that's also, nobody gets that. Most people don't see that. It's like I say, most people, the best soundbite I've ever heard in my life was Bill Clinton's after everything happened. And he was being asked about Mark Carmel, the place had just burned to the ground. And they said, well, what about Waco? What about what happened there? And he says, if a bunch of religious fanatics want to kill themselves, what can the federal government do about it? That was it. Waco wasn't mentioned after that in the press or anything. It took many years for it to be mentioned again, because that was the soundbite that made everyone say, yep, I get that. But religious fanatics kill themselves. That's the end of it. We're going to talk about that a little bit at the end. That's Victor Houteff, the man that originally moved from California to establish Mount Carmel. That's Lois Roden, the prophetess, if you will, before David took over, and George Roden's mother. This is an early photo, I think, from them. I think this was when the people came from Palestine, and they were coming back to the property. So this is an early, I think the news people are filming them coming back. This was all before my time. I was only there for the last couple of years. Here's the famous card. Messiah Productions, David Koresh, Steve Schneider. The Pomona, California address with the phone number. That's the card they handed me. And that's the back of the card. It had all this religious scripture, and I just handed it back. I'm not interested, I said. But when I actually started to get studies on this. It was fascinating to me. This is the kingdom to be set up. And Revelation talks about it, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zechariah, Malachi, Hosea. That is a little out of focus. But all these prophets and all these chapters talk about the same event to happen. The kingdom being set up in Mount Zion, being raised above all other mountain ranges, and the people of God will dwell there at the top. God will live on the earth, it says, and that there will be a building of fire nobody can get into, but the people that dwell therein can step out and go back into the fire as they wish. All these prophets talk about it in great detail, and they were able to show you one after another, and it just created quite a fascinating story. That's the famous God Rocks t-shirt that David came up with, his artist. I'll have a picture of Cliff. Cliff did this design, and David Koresh God Rocks, he sold those for a while, and that was one of his things. On the back of the shirt was the seraphim, the six-winged fiery flying serpent, and Isaiah 14, I think that says. So that's another design that Cliff did that I just always thought was pretty cool. That's a picture of Serenity. Did you all see the 6-part series that came out? A few people? Okay. Well, Serenity was Michelle's daughter and the little girl that I was pretty close with. Rory Culkin played me, and anyway, that's the real Serenity. Just adorable. That's a picture of David with Clive Doyle back in the day. That's David Koresh's mother, Bonnie. He made the phone call to her when he was wounded, saying that he would be back. And that's David's mother. She was killed a few years ago, I think over 5 years ago now. Her sister was, her sister had schizophrenia, had stabbed Bonnie, killed her. Yeah, it was a terrible, terrible thing. That's a picture of David Perry Jones. He was the administrator of the group. He had been there many, many years through, I think, Ben and Lois. And so he was the administrator, and also David Koresh's father-in-law. He was the father of Rachel and Michelle. And that's his son, David Jones. David Jones was the mailman who found out that they were coming from one of the news agencies, and went back and told David that the ATF, or that there was, he didn't say the ATF, but somebody from the government was coming, and the raid was going to be today. That's him. Now he had a daughter and 2 sons that came out during the siege. Heather I'm very close with. I'm very close with Kevin, not so much Mark. But they came out during the siege, and Heather, her story is unbelievable. It's tragic, fascinating. She's very upset, of course. Obviously, she lost, David Koresh was her uncle. She lost her grandfather, her father. All of Koresh's kids were her cousins, so she lost her whole family, basically. And one of the things that happened, she was probably 7 or 8 when she came out of the building, and her dad, she remembered that morning, because this was during the siege. So I'm going to be flashing backwards and forwards. But this was during the siege, and her father said that she had to go out. And she didn't want to leave. She said, "I don't want to leave you, Dad." And, David Koresh, he sat on David Koresh's lap. He said, "Listen, you got to go. Be a good girl for your mom." And then, David said goodbye to her and said, "Here, I want to give you this." And he gave her a teddy bear. And that was her last gift that she got from her dad. So she took the teddy bear and she put it in her backpack because she didn't want the federal agents to get it. And I guess she had the backpack in her hand. And as she came out, I picture this, a little girl having to come out and facing the speaker saying, "Walk to the Red Cross sign." And as she got to the end of where the tanks were, she fell in one of the ruts of where the tracks had made. And before she could get up, and 2 agents came out, one grabbed her and one grabbed her backpack. They took her into the tank, and they took her to the first checkpoint, second checkpoint. They got back to the TSTC, which was the staging area. And when they got there, they took her upstairs so she could have a conversation with her father, where the other agents had gotten the backpack. She wasn't aware of it. She forgot about it. Excuse me. So they took her in. She talked to her dad on the phone, and then she was very sad after. She was crying. And when the agent said, "Let's get you want a Coke? Come on, dear, let's get you a Coke." And they took her down to where the Coke machines were. And as they were passing, there were a bunch of tents in this building. And one of the doors was open, and she could hear two agents laughing, and she looked in as she was passing by, and the agents had her bag on a table, and the bag was ripped to shreds. And one of the agents had her teddy bear, and she heard him say, well, let's see if there's a bomb in here, and put the knife in and destroyed the teddy bear. And they allowed her to see that. And that just blew my mind. So that loud except for her dad. And she hears them laughing, and that's the last, that's the thing she sees before she gets a Coke. So I know we're going to open up to Dave pretty soon. We're going to talk about some psychological issues with this, but let me just tell you how it's affected Heather. A couple years ago when I was living out in Waco, again, I moved back for a little while. I was getting to know Heather again and her family. They call me Uncle Dave, which it's a great honor. And we went to a store, and I was looking at Heather because I was talking to her, and she stopped, and her eyes got real bright, wide, and she started to sway, and I thought she was going to fall down. I grabbed her arm. I said, Heather, what's wrong? And she just couldn't, all she could do was stare. And I looked over, and there was a cop in his full uniform holding the door for us. And just the sight of a cop in uniform gave her that visceral reaction. So she says if she gets pulled over, she just shakes and shakes. They think she's on drugs because she has that visceral reaction whenever she sees a law enforcement uniform. So that's how it's affected Heather Jones. Anyway, that story just blew me away. That's Wayne Martin. That's the Harvard-educated attorney who had a law practice within Waco. They had several, 6 or 7 kids, him and his wife, who was a survivor. But Wayne died in the fire, and he was the one that was on the phone calling 911 instantly, trying to negotiate a ceasefire. The second that the ATF started to shoot at the front door, Wayne got on with 911 saying, there's 100 armed agents here at Mount Carmel, and they're shooting at us. Tell them to call it off. There's women and children here. Some of you may have heard that audio before. It's out there. So that's Wayne. And that's me with Sheila Martin. That's Wayne's wife, who survived and came out with 2 or 3 of her children. Her oldest daughter and her oldest son died in the conflagration. They stayed with Wayne, but the other ones, the younger ones, all came out with Sheila. That's Steve Schneider, David Koresh's right-hand man, as they called him. He was the guy that was standing with David in the Guitar Center. He was a very slick talker in Wisconsin. Very smart guy, bright guy, just talk a mile a minute. He knew a little bit about everything. This is back in 1992, 93, and Steve and I were talking about the Illuminati, and we were talking about all these things that most people then didn't know about because there was no YouTube. The internet was just getting started, so to have you really had to search for things if you wanted to know about secret societies, the Illuminati, that kind of thing. The symbolism on the dollar bill. Steve knew all this stuff, and he would talk to us about it and show. And it was just fascinating. The guy fascinated me. I spent so much time listening to him and talking to him. He's just quite a guy. Anyway, he died the last day. According to the autopsy reports, the belief is they both had bullet wounds to their head. So the scenario is that he shot David and then shot himself. It looked like they were in an area of the building, I think, on the concrete structure where they couldn't escape. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, especially some of the things that happened at the back of the building, which I personally believe. I'm not going to show the infrared video because I couldn't get. I spent so much time on the slide stuff. I had some issues to get the slideshow together that I didn't have time to do the video aspect that I had wanted to, and I apologize for that. But the infrared video, anybody can look this up. I think on my website, wacosurvivors.com. All kinds of audio, all kinds of video testimony you can check at your leisure. And there's the infrared, which I'll talk about that toward the end. I just want to introduce some of the people in Mount Carmel so we can humanize them a little bit. The series did a pretty good job of that, I think. That's Jamie Casillo. He was one of the original drummers for David. He started playing bass for David, and then David kept going through different musicians. But Jamie lived there. He was one of the 9. He came out during the siege, I believe. And he survived and went to jail for several years. Now, a lot of the guys that went to jail, I can't remember. I don't have the number. I'm getting older, guys. something like 7 or 8 guys went to jail, some of them for 40 years on a weapons violation the jury thought was thrown out. I'm just to make a long story short here. They all got released early when their case got to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court overturned everyone's sentences. One of the judges said they thought it was the worst judicial decision they've ever seen was throwing these guys in jail. But the government needed a victory. They needed to say that these guys were guilty of conspiracy or manslaughter or something. They weren't going to walk away without some victory. And so some of these guys languished in jail 5 to 7 years before everything was overthrown, and they all got out. But it did get to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court did overthrow their sentences. The things that happened at the trial in San Antonio were so shocking to me. The things I learned about this government and the judicial system was absolutely shocking to me. For the civil case, which occurred years later, I took a friend of mine, and he sat in there with me for a portion of it. And we walked out one day, he said, "Do I live in Russia? I thought I lived in America. I cannot believe what just occurred." And it's true. They play what they want to play. They show the jury what they want to show the jury. The best example I can give that I remember from the trials is they played the tape. There's a famous tape of Bill Buford being, he's one of the ATF agents that was gravely wounded. He survived. But he's on the front of a pickup truck. He's on the hood. And they're going up the Double E Ranch Road. And the news people are following because all the agents at this point, the ceasefire's been negotiated, everyone's leaving. It's like little ants peppering the side of the hill is what it looked like. There were so many of them. It's crazy. It's just insane. It's quite a thing to witness, that many agents walking away. But one of the camera guys went up, they had the camera rolling, and one of the agents says, "Put that damn camera down." He went over and pushed him on the ground and roughed him up a little bit. He's like, "You guys invited me here. You invited me here." And they're roughing him up. Because everyone, obviously, they had a lot of wounded agents. They were upset. They're human, so I get that. But what they did for the jury is they showed Bill Buford being wheeled out, and right before the ATF agent went up to the guy with the camera, they cut it. That's what they showed the jury. So the jury didn't get to see the ATF throwing the camera guy on the ground. And I'm like, aren't you going to play the rest of the tape for the jury? Don't they have the right to see kind of the kind of people that were there on law enforcement side? They only showed the jury what they wanted to. That's my point. And I'm just going to use one. I'm just going to use that as an example. There's many, many examples that we can go through. That's one of the kids that was Joseph Martinez, Julie Martinez's son. That was Isaiah Martinez. During the siege, we played cards for crayons, and we'd hung out. We'd watch the tanks go up and down, and there was one day that we were looking at the window at the tanks. I'm going, "There's something you're never going to see again, guys. Look at that tank just ran over that car." The next day in the press, the next day in the press, it said, the FBI said it at the, every day they had a press conference. They said, "The Davidians are holding their kids up at the windows and using them as human shields." So that's how they spun that. And, if you're a kid and you see a tank driving in front of your house, you're going to look out the window. That's kind of the way I looked at it. But they always had some kind of snide remark or some evil spin they put on everything that we did and anything that was said. And, it got hard to deal with every day. You're listening to the press conference, and they're talking about us like we're just this crazy cult group that did all these terrible things, when from our perspective, all we did was defend ourselves. It's the way I always looked at it. And using words like cult, I know that was going to be a question I think we were going to bring up, but let's use that. I want to talk about the doublespeak of the government that they used. Cult is a word. For me, I usually put the word satanic in front of it when I hear cult. I mean, that's kind of the image. Now, there's different groups that obviously aren't satanic. They're groups that revolve around one person. It could be considered a cult. Mormonism with Joseph Smith. There's all kinds of, just about every single religion. Christianity was and can be considered a cult. The 12 guys leave their wives and their fishing lives to follow this guy around the desert. So a cult can, be anything. But it was used here to demonize the group. Mount Carmel wasn't a home or a church. Mount Carmel was called what? A compound. A sniper wasn't a sniper, but a sniper was a forward observer. In other words, the guy that's got the gun on you with the X that could take your life by pulling the trigger is a forward observer. The tanks were CEVs. They were not called tanks. The government called them CEVs, even though they were tanks. It got as ridiculous as CS gas and the ferret rounds. When they first started injecting the CS gas, they used these 40 millimeter ferret rounds, and they would shoot them into the building. And the ferret rounds looked like little rocket kind of things. They had fins on the end. But on the first day when they were throwing flashbang grenades in, the flashbang grenades didn't explode, but they performed a rapid expansion of gases. So that's how deep the doublespeak got. They just, everything they did that would be considered harsh, they softened, right? Everything we did, they made out to be just the most evil thing of all time. So that's Julie. She was the daughter. I'm sorry. She was her mother and her grandmother were at Mount Carmel, and those were her kids. So they were all there, that whole family. That's Cliff Sellers. He's the artist, the one that did the designs for the shirts. He did the design for the cards. David Koresh had some motorcycles, and he did custom guitar work for David. He did all kinds of really great stuff. Fantastic artist. That's Sherry Doyle, one of Clive's daughters. She died in the fire. Clive Doyle's daughter. That's one of our Huskies. An early picture of David Koresh and his first wife, Rachel. I think this is around the time that they went to Israel and he started to get his visions. That's Clive Doyle today, with Kevin Jones on the left and Heather Jones on the right. Okay, so here's a picture of the building being shot at during the initial raid. Now, I was in the cafeteria area, and we could hear the helicopters in the background. And David Koresh came downstairs, and he had a bunch of guys with him, 3 or 4 guys, and he said, they're coming, they're on their way, don't anybody do anything stupid. I'm going to go to the front door, we want to talk to them. That's what we're about here. Don't do anything stupid. He left, ran down the hall, and I heard, hold on, there's women and children. Then I heard gunshots, just 1 or 2, and then a ton. So it seemed like as soon as he got to the door, it erupted. His story, and everyone that was at the front door, they all told me right after, that he went to the door, he held it open, he said, hold on, there's women and children here. The door flew back in his hand from bullets hitting it. When that happened, he fell back. A bunch of bullets came into the front. One of them hit Perry Jones, the gentleman we met earlier in that picture. Perry went down screaming from a bullet wound in his stomach. And that's when all people defended themselves and they started shooting back at the ATF. The ATF made it sound like it was an ambush, and I just want to make this point. They made it sound like there was a person at every window ambushing them. We were waiting for them, and they couldn't even get off the cattle trailers. If this were an ambush, they're coming to attack us, number one, so let's think about what an ambush is. Number two, if that were the case, no one would have gotten off those cattle trailers. But the fact they got off and surrounded the building obviously shows to me it was not an ambush. Plus, I think it was the only ambush in history where the people that are doing the ambushing call 911, call police to ask for justice. So, was there a question? Okay, we'll get to questions anyway. So this is that picture. It's hard to see the bullet holes, but there's quite a few at the front door. Those were 2 metal doors. One of the doors was entered into evidence at the trials in San Antonio, and the other door disappeared. The door that had the most bullet holes coming from the outside in, and you could see where the trajectory was. Dick DeGuerin saw this. Many, many witnesses saw the doors. That door disappeared. It was never entered into evidence, and when the defense asked, where's that door, the government said, it must have disintegrated in the fire. So the other door exists, but that one disintegrated in the fire. Okay. How about all the videotapes that show the early stages of the raid, like perhaps they could shed some light on who fired first? Our cameras malfunctioned over at the surveillance house, so we don't have those either. 2 malfunctioned and 1 was recorded over accidentally. I think that was the case. But every early aspect tape was gone. So that's convenient, I think. That's the famous picture of the agents going in. I was speaking to Dave earlier about this event. What was going on? We see all those, I'm sure many of you remember this, but you see all those bullets coming out, you see an agent come out of the office and go down. The story that I was told by Scott Sonobi, who was in the back, he was in David Koresh's room, and this is the adjoining room where they believed all the firearms were. So they went in, they threw a flashbang grenade in. Scott said he heard a big bang. He looked in the room, and he saw a guy dressed in black raise his AR-15, raise his firearm to shoot Scott. So Scott ducked back in the other room, grabbed his sidearm, and just started firing blindly for dear life. So he was firing out of self-defense. And that's when you see all those bullets coming out. That's Scott Sonobi trying to defend himself. And then the agents get on the ladder, and he goes down the ladder. So the first thing, now there was another group of agents that they actually did portray this in the series, which I was happy about. It's one of the things they did an initial movie or a show. It was called Ambush at Waco. Straight up propaganda film. It was such a propaganda film that the person that wrote it for the guy that was made during the siege, before it even ended, the person that made Ambush at Waco has apologized to all the survivors for making that piece of trash and has said it was a straight up propaganda film that the only information they had is what the government gave him, and he wrote it around that. So he doesn't even acknowledge his own piece of work. That's what a piece of trash that particular movie is. Tim Daly, I think he was the guy that played David Koresh. Long story short, again, there's none of my stories are short, I'm sorry. But we had a penned up area where there was 5 Alaskan fawn, the mother, and 5 of her pups, 6 Alaskan Malamutes. It was penned up. Okay, I guess one of the dogs could have jumped the fence. But we know that they had a group of ATF agents that were assigned to go and eradicate the dogs, to kill the dogs. And they did. They shot all the dogs dead. What made me angry with that original propaganda film is they show an agent going with a fire extinguisher, and the agent's trying to put the dogs out with a fire extinguisher. In other words, in this propaganda film, the agent is using a fire extinguisher to push the dogs back. They didn't use a fire extinguisher. They killed the dogs. During the siege, Cliff Sellers made these signs. We did different signs at different times. One was Rodney King, we understand. At the time, it was the Rodney King thing. One was scripture, which showed kind of what's happening right now, that they would attack us. So there was a scriptural one. I can't read that one from here, but that's what it looked like during the siege. That's the Double E Ranch Road sign. Just wanted to put that in there because I like it. But that's the Double E Ranch Road is the road that Mount Carmel is actually on. That's the one that the tanks went up and down. And if you go to visit Mount Carmel today, when you go down the Double E Ranch Road, it's been paved over and everything, but it does like a weird little wave. So your car won't exactly be straight up and down. And I believe this is from the tanks going back and forth on it for so long. They weren't actually able to, fix it properly. There's another. Oh, this is a good one. This must be where they're CS gassing, because you see that big boom? They went in with that big boom. After they ran out of the ferret rounds, the CS gas on the last day, they would take the booms and push them into the building and then spray the CS gas at you. I was going to save this to later, but we're there. It's got to be a free flow. I'm not going in any order, obviously. But the CS gas is a gas that's a riot control agent. According to the Geneva Convention, you're never supposed to use it indoors. It's only a riot control agent to be used outdoors in the open air because it could kill people, especially those with lesser kids and older people with compromised immunity and compromised lung capacity. So it actually can kill kids. And this is the gas they chose to use inside Mount Carmel. One of the tanks went directly through the front of the building, all the way to where the concrete structure is. That survived a fire from the 50s, the concrete structure, our walk-in cooler. So that's where the kids were placed to try to escape the fire. They were placed under wet blankets because at that point there was so much, gas and such. But the tank went all the way to the open door and put the turret inside and then sprayed the gas in there. So I think many of them were anesthetized. Maybe that's not the right word. They couldn't move. I don't believe they could move. I think some of them choked to death. Anyway, no one was coming out of there was the key. They always say, why didn't people come out? Well, I can tell you from my experience, I saw a tank come through the front door. When a tank comes through your front door, you go backwards. You don't go out to where they just came in. And remember, they're saying this is not an assault. Do not fire at us. This is not an assault. We are just putting in tear gas. This is not an assault. Boom, tank comes through, takes out the two front doors, comes all the way into the chapel area, and I have to jump back to avoid being run over by a tank. So that's the kind of double speak. They're saying this is not an assault. Well, the tank is coming through your front door. I don't know if you can imagine what that's like. But you definitely don't go out through that hole that the tank just made. So that's the boom. We got some. Well, there's the picture of the dogs, and I'm sorry to put that image up there, but Craig Summers went out and buried Peter Gent in the front, and then he lined the dogs up because he took care of the dogs. He wanted the world to see what the ATF had done. So they did not use fire extinguishers on these dogs. They killed the dogs first thing. In fact, some of the trial testimony early on indicated that some of the first shots could have been the agents shooting the dogs. The teams, one guy on the team believed that he shot first at the dogs, and that's when all hell broke loose. Another guy's testimony, which they changed during the criminal proceedings, right? They ended up changing this testimony. No, for the congressional hearings, they ended up changing it. But another of the agents said that he reached for his gun and it went off, and he believed that to be the first shot fired. So it kind of depends on where you were, I think. That testimony, by the way, he scrapped it later. He changed his testimony. That was a testimony he gave to the Texas Rangers. When it came to the court proceeding, he no longer said that he fired, that his gun accidentally went off. But he said that early on. Things like that happened over and over and over again. I love this picture because this shows the side of the building, and there's 3 huge tanks. Those are 500-gallon tanks. One had unleaded fuel. I think two had regular fuel, and one was diesel. So, David was prepared. He had his own fuel, all that right there. These tanks were filled with fuel. A few days before the final conflagration, what they were doing is they were taking all the debris away from the building. And I will show you an aerial photos later, a photo later, where you can see they're building a fire break around the building. They're clearing everything. And I sat there in one of these side windows and I watched these tanks. I watched the tank go over and tip them all over. And I watched the fuel pour out onto the ground in front of them. So this whole side of the building where I came out, Clive Doyle came out, Jamie Casillo and Derek Lovelock came out. We all came out of that window there. We had to walk through that. So, see, what upsets me about, well, so many things upset me about that. But the fact that they say what they want and that we have no chance to even respond to it. They said about Clive Doyle that he had fuel on his shoes, so therefore he was one of the people spreading fuel and starting the fire. Everyone had fuel in their shoes that came out of that window because 1,500 gallons of fuel was poured onto the ground right before it. So almost everything they said has been irrefutable. Only guess what? The Dallas Morning News doesn't talk to me. They don't ask me my era of events. It's all been very one-sided. Sorry to mention them. It could be any of the news organizations, ABC, CBS, NBC. They've all done it. They've all painting the picture that corporate America wants them to paint of the event, and the truth hasn't really ever been able to come out. I've told my story, some other people have told their stories, but a lot of people didn't want to even hear what I had to say after all this. Certainly the liberal media didn't want to talk to me. It was only certain groups, the constitutional groups, these were the only groups that even wanted to hear what I had to say. So it's taken a long time to be able to actually get the story out. Oh, great, there's an area photo. So you can see all the tracks, see all the tank tracks into the big circle. You notice how there's nothing around it? That's a fire break. They just made sure there was no debris that would burn that could spread anything were a fire to occur. I'm going to show you some more destruction that they did to the back of the building. Okay, what people couldn't see, because the cameras could only see from 3 miles away, or 2 miles away, Satellite City, there was a media blackout in the back. Nobody knew what was going on in the back of the building, but this is what was happening. The tank was going through the gymnasium area and raising it to the ground. That's one of the first shots of it. And you can see there's a dog run there, right? Right now that's intact, and it's just that side that's down. I'll get back to another picture, come later. But I wanted to point this picture out. These are a little out of order, and I apologize for that. I had many issues trying to get this together. But here's the FBI, and they're sifting through the evidence, right? They're sifting for evidence. And you can see there's, dirt, there's sifters. And down here in the lower corner, those are bleach bottles. So this is the crime scene. And it appears that they are bleaching evidence. So I don't know what really is going on here, to be honest with you, but I'm just telling you what it appears to me. I was surprised to see bleach at a place where they're sifting through evidence. So I'm sure there's people that are more technical that might know why that is. But this picture always shocked me. That's a picture of. This was made on the film set. I didn't have the original picture of the Paul Fada's El Camino. But at one point, and I watched from the inside, the tank came, pulled the El Camino back, and another tank ran over the El Camino, just totally destroyed it right in front of us. And so then we would get in touch with them, and, with the FBI guys, the negotiators, and we'd say, you guys just ran over one of our cars. You keep saying if we come out, we'll have something to come back to. But why are you destroying our property? And here was the answer. We can't help that, Dave. That's those, you got a bunch of young guys out there in the tanks, and they never got to play with a tank before. And so we're sorry about that. We can't handle what they do out there. We can't control them. So sorry, but that's the breaks, basically. So this really destroyed we're going to talk about the negotiations. This really destroyed the negotiations that were happening, because when you're being told one thing and then something else directly occurs, like we're not going to destroy your property, and then you watch a tank run over one of the vehicles, well, you're lying to us. And that's how it went. Originally with Gary Nesner, who was the FBI negotiator who was featured in the series. He was working with David and Steve Steiner, and people were coming out. I think 12 kids, 18 kids came out. It's a bunch of the older people. And as soon as more people would come out, they would start putting the pressure on. Okay, we want more. Send them all out now. And that would just cause everyone to back up. And then we'd be punished. They'd do stuff like that. They did so many things during the siege to destroy negotiations that we get to the point we did not take them seriously at all. And we did they were just lying to us. They were outright lying. And it was stuff like this, who wants to come out to people that are doing this kind of thing? And this went on and on. Actually, on my website, wacosurvivors.com, there's a section, there's someone named, they hate it when I mention this name. So there's a guy named Stuart Wright, and he's a professor at Beaumont, Texas. And he's done many analysis of the government actions at Waco. And one of the things he did is he said, it's too bad that there isn't a guidebook the FBI could follow to make sure everyone would come out safely. Well, there is. There is a book that they're supposed to use. There's 22 separate rules. The FBI violated 11 of their own rules, and he goes through it with a fine-tooth comb and shows you where all these principles and rules were violated, which actually would cause people to not trust the government and not want to come out, and basically make David Koresh's prophecy come true even more. The psychological effect made people draw closer to each other, like closer to the group. So they had the exact effect that they said publicly that they wanted. They said they were doing everything and we were being unreasonable. If you were inside that building, your impression was, we're doing everything we can and they're being unreasonable. So it's one of those situations, two locomotives headed down the same track toward each other and neither one's backing down. That's what we had there. That's just a picture of the building, what it looked like. I think that's the movie set. Oh boy, this is interesting. You want me to talk about this one, right, Tom? I can't really read this from here, but I'm just going to kind of paraphrase what this is. The government said they couldn't get David Koresh because he never left the building. When this got to Congress, they said, why didn't you get David when he was jogging in front of the ATF surveillance house, or when he went to town, or what? Well, he never left the building, so we couldn't, he was a tough nut to crack, that kind of thing. Well, that's what they said publicly. And this is what a lot of the news organizations printed as being true. This piece of paper is an ATF document that says that 2 of the agents went over to David's residence, and are you ready for this? They fired guns with him. They went out onto a firing range and shot guns. They always made it sound like, oh, you couldn't get close to David. David invited them. They were over there Rodriguez was over there just about every day for about 2 months. A couple of the other agents, on this occasion, they mentioned them by name. I can't read it, so this is the document anyway that shows and proves that they were over there. They weren't afraid, and they actually fired guns with them. Imagine the guy that, hey, that's a nice AR. Here, try mine. I'll try yours. It's shooting at the firing range. So, Tom, you may have some words about this later. Let's remember that one, because I know you had an impression about this. But that kind of blows my mind, and here's the document. So they weren't as afraid as they let on. And he wasn't as inaccessible as they let on, if you read this document. It's amazing. Oh, that's a good one. That's an overview. That was the concrete, this structure over to the far left was a tornado shelter that was being built. Do you see this little, where is it? Okay. You see, I wish I had a laser pointer. Anyway. That's a hallway that was underground, and if that mound there leading to the building on it was the underground bus. There actually was a bus that was buried underground. That was the original tornado shelter, and then as the community grew, as people started coming from England, the community was like 40 or 50 people, and it grew to 130 when everyone started coming from England. Anyway, the buried bus is there. It's an interesting aerial photo. That tower, that dark tower, that was the water tower that Peter Gent was shot on. He was at the top. Now, there's an agent out there that I have spoken to who claims that his friend shot Peter Gent from the ground. My belief has always been that Peter Gent was shot from the air, from the helicopters. Everybody believed the helicopters fired at the building. I personally saw, if you see, there's a water tank back there. I'll get a better picture of the water tank. There was a water tank, 3 water tanks. One was directly in front of Winston Blake's room. I saw Winston Blake's body. He was laying there in a pool of blood with the back of his head toward me. I could just see the blood mixing with water, and all this water was coming into the room from the water tank. It had been fired from the air, went through the water tank, and killed Winston. All this water was pouring into the room through these little holes in the water tank. And after Winston was buried, at some point I went into the room and I got down and I could even see right where the tank was turning like this at the corner, right? The bullet hole was here and came out through the other side, right at the corner of the water tank. I got down and I could see even the burrs of the plastic I could see were coming out. So it indicated to me that that bullet was shot from the outside in, not from the inside out. And I matched up the trajectory of the entry hole, the exit hole, and it looked like it was fired from between the 2 towers, that tower there and that tower there, and it could only have been fired from the air. So I personally always believed that the helicopters fired in the building. Kevin Whitecliffe was at the back of the building, and right after the ceasefire, I saw him. He was in the cafeteria. And I said, that's crazy, all those shots started coming from the front. He goes, no, they came from the helicopters. And I'm like, what are you talking about? They sounded to me like the first shots came from the front. He said, I was standing outside, I watched the helicopters coming and shooting. They were firing, and he was angry. He was really angry, yelling this to me. I go, well, don't take it out on me, buddy. But, this wasn't a guy that was making this up or was lying. He saw the helicopters firing. There's testimony from the grand jury that I had gone through. Marjorie Thomas is one of the people that said the helicopters were so close that she ducked down when she saw one go by the window. There's several witnesses that saw the helicopter shooting in the building. To this day, every ATF agent claims that the helicopters did not shoot into the building and that the helicopters were no closer than 100 yards from the building. They all say this. It's not true. It's not true. Everybody that I believe and trust and I was there for those helicopters were much closer than that, and they did shoot at the building. So that's anyway. That will go to my grave. That's my belief. This is an interesting photo. This is from one of the sniper nests. That's particularly interesting. There's that little hole, and you can tell that's a sniper nest photo. So that's one of the snipers who was there had this view of the building. And I just want to mention that one of the snipers that the FBI chose to use was Tilon Horiuchi. He was the FBI sniper that was at Ruby Ridge and that shot Vicki Weaver in the face while she was holding her daughter in her hands, her infant, telling Randy to come in and her friend Kevin to come in through the door. She was holding the door and blew her face off. One of my friends on Facebook, who I've had the pleasure, the honor of talking to, was Sarah Weaver. Sarah was, I think, 15 or 16. She was the teenage girl of Randy Weaver. She was there when all this happened. And she told me that one of the hardest things for her was when they needed to eat, she had to walk past her mother's body in the pool of blood to go get food from the pantry. And she had to walk back and forth. And she said the cruelest thing that they did, and it has haunted her, is the next day after they shot her, one of the agents said, "Hey, Vicki, what you making for breakfast? You making scrambled eggs and bacon?" And they said that with, it's just an awesome thing. Randy's there. Her daughter has to hear that. My point is, these people are proud, they're arrogant, and they're just the kind of spirit that someone that can say that just absolutely blows my mind. Now, listen, I'm going to try to be fair. I try to be as open-minded as possible. Okay, so I feel like I have to say this publicly. The agent that said that they did not know that Vicki was dead. You can believe that or not. I don't like to call anybody a liar personally. So when they were saying that, they were just razzing her. They didn't think that Vicki was dead. They said they didn't know that till much later. But I think Lon T. Horiuchi knew exactly what he was shooting. He wasn't that far away. They had expert witnesses get up and say, from such and such distance, do you know what you're shooting? And every sniper they got on stand said, we know exactly what we're shooting. There's no way that he didn't know he shot Vicki Weaver in the face. So there we go. I'm just going to leave the rest to history. But Lon T. Horiuchi, that same sniper, was at Mount Carmel. He was at Waco. Another side with one of the helicopters flying by. And this is something David and I discussed earlier. So I had the interesting experience today of talking to a psychologist for a couple of hours, which is very interesting. I don't want to say I dabbled in therapy, but I've had a therapist. And I'm always like, okay, listen, I'm really angry. I know that I have PTSD. This isn't a surprise. So how can we move this along? Can I do hypnosis? Is there a shot you can give me? What can I do to get rid of the anger? How can I be a whole person and not have to deal with flying off the handle when someone cuts me off in traffic and saying these terrible things? I like to take swear words and put them all together in a nice little chain. I get very creative too. So it's like, I don't want to be that person. Okay, I don't want to be angry, but it's just there. It's that lack of justice stays with you forever. It just makes you crazy if you bottle it up. So what's my point? Oh, my point was the PTSD thing, which we didn't know what that was back then. But when I came back to Maine after all this, and when I would hear a helicopter, my eyes would open up and I would be under the bed. So I'd hear a helicopter and just wake up under the bed. It's like, how did I get here? I don't remember getting on the floor and hiding under the bed, but that's how it affected me. Sounds. Helicopters. Helicopters are huge. Every time for probably a year I heard a helicopter, I was like, start shaking and just looking around. But originally it was just being under the bed. Just, all of a sudden I'm not conscious and then I'm conscious and I'm under the bed. So that was fun. Good times. So the helicopters buzzed Night and day, they buzzed the building. They buzzed the building so much that that sound of the helicopter blades, you didn't even notice it after a while. It's like, anybody here like the Blues Brothers? How often does the train go by? So often you won't even notice. Same thing with a tank or a helicopter when you hear it enough. I'm sure, are there some military guys here? Anyone, veterans? You probably know what I'm talking about. Another aerial footage, this is a good one. See, the tank is now all the way through the gymnasium area, and it's raised into the ground. That's level. And what that sounded like, that doesn't do it justice. I think, imagine the loudest scraping sound you've ever heard. Nails on a chalkboard magnified by like 1,000 times. Scraping and the building shaking, and that's what it felt like when the tank was going through the back of that structure. And the scraping, and you're shaking, you're like, what is going on back there? But at the same time, you got another tank coming to the side shooting the CS gas at you. So all this is happening at once, and it's just, it's very surreal. It's a very surreal thing. I didn't realize until much later when I saw these pictures what was going on in the back. I had no idea this was happening. Oh, we'll talk about that too in a minute. There's some more photos here I want to show you guys.
When was this? Right here.
Oh, this is April 19th, the last day. The 6 hours on April 19th. It started at 6 when they started CS gassing us, and at 12:09 the fire began and the place burned to the ground. So there were 6 hours of straight gassing and taking the building apart little by little before the fire actually started. Here's the fire starting. I want to show this picture because see that big hole to the far right? That's the hole that myself, Jamie Casillo, Derek Lovelock, and Clive Doyle came out of. We came out of a place where the cameras could still see us. In fact, everyone that survived, other than Graham Craddock, came out of the front and the side of the building. Nobody else came out of the back of the building that lived to tell the tale. The majority of the people were in the cafeteria. So why would that be? I always wondered about that. Oh, I hit the wrong one. Okay. Another building out, the fire is happening. I'm looking for a specific picture, so let's just see if I can get to it. Oh, there's a good one. Okay, the flames are happening now. It's, quite engulfed. But you notice that big hole in the front? Excuse me for a minute, guys. Y'all got some great pollen down here. That huge hole in the front of the building there, you notice how that's right in front of where that tower is? On that tower was the concrete structure. The tower is built on the concrete structure. Okay, so that's where all the kids were. They were supposed to be put in the underground bus, but I don't think anyone could get to the bus because of the destruction in that room, so I think they had to end up in the concrete structure. I wasn't a part of that decision making, but for a fact, that huge hole is the tank went through that place all the way into the internal structure, to the cafeteria, to the concrete structure where they place CS gas in there. They showed videos of soldiers in a room that has CS gas in it. They come out, they're disoriented, their nose is running. It's just horrible. Let alone, imagine a kid in there. And let's just say this out loud. CS gas, we can't use it in wartime against an enemy. It's banned under the Geneva Convention. However, there's no law saying that we can't use it here against our own citizens. And this is the gas that the FBI sold to Janet Reno is going to be harmless. It's just tear gas. It's going to be harmless for the kids. Bull. I beg your pardon, but bull. One more thing. This is important. The original ferret rounds, they would shoot the CS gas in. They would say, oh, it's non-flammable CS gas. Okay. It's true. CS gas is non-flammable. But the propelling agent of CS gas is methylene chloride. Methylene chloride is the same stuff they use in paint thinner. It's flammable, methylene chloride. Not only that, the CS gas isn't a gas, it's a powder. Did you know this? And you could see the little flakes all over my black jacket I had. I could see the little white flakes. That's the CS gas. It's a powder. And just like a grain silo, if there's enough subatomic particles in the air of powder, if it is introduced to flame, you get a fireball. Excuse me. I saw a fireball upstairs. Derek Lovelock saw a fireball in the back. Let's see if I got a picture of that. Excuse me, guys. In the back, there's a, Yeah, you remember where the gym was raised to the ground, but there was that catwalk? Derek Lovelock said he saw a fireball go through that catwalk. Mine was the upper quarter. If you're looking at the lower left-hand quarter, let me see if I can get a better picture. Oh, that's an interesting picture. When I see the picture, I'll go back to the fireball story. Is this the one? I can't tell because it's blurry, but in a clearer picture, one of these agents has a breathing apparatus on his back, so they are obviously prepared for a fire. But that's one of the CEVs that's open, or the tanks that's open. Oh, thank you. Jeez, I thought you were coming to take me away. Thank you. I thought it was Byron Sage for a minute. I was going downtown. Really did scare me a little. Thank you, by the way. Okay, that's an amazing picture. Here it is. That's Derek Lovelock in the front, Jamie Casillo. You might notice that thin dude there, third from the right. Yeah, that's me. So, yeah, I used to be thin. It was nice. Days are gone. And I think it's Rennis Abraham is in the back there. Clive made it later because his arms were on fire. But that's me coming out, and again, to this day, I have people that have approached me at the memorial saying, well, you weren't even there, Dave. Who are you to tell your story? Who do you think you are? I'm like, who do I think I am? What are you talking about? I've had people say that Linda Thompson, okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's talk about Linda Thompson real quick. How much time we got?
Probably need to wrap it up in about 5 minutes.
All right, let's not talk about Linda Thompson. Okay, yeah, you're right. Okay, Linda Thompson she did a terrible documentary called The Big Lie, where a tank goes in, it looks like it's flaming. The tank comes out, goes back in, it's flaming. It's not flaming. It's an optical illusion. If you see the uncut version, it's very clearly an optical illusion. But she's one of the people that got my initial talks that I was going to have. She had them canceled because she said I was a government agent. So this is the kind of stuff that I've had to deal with it. From both sides, it's like, okay, you're this crazy cultist, and we hate you and wish you would have died in the fire. I've had hate mail that said that, to the point where the people that are actually supposed to be supporting me are calling me a government agent, so you can't win on either side. That's why I do not like the radical right and I do not like the radical left, because they're both radical, they both lie, and they both yell so damn loudly that they can't hear anyone speak. So they can't learn anything. And then we get what we have in America today. It's ridiculous. People need to shut up and do a little listening to each other's side and say, we're all Americans. And, we should not be yelling at each other or shooting each other. We should be saving this country and coming together and telling the government we're not going to put up with it. Voting rate, voting doesn't even work. I'm not going to go there. 5 minutes. Sorry, we're moving on. In the aftermath, they put up the American flag, the Texas flag, and the ATF flag. That's our flagpole. We're going to show the aftermath now. There's the concrete structure, the only unit left standing. So that's where all the kids were. And they raised their flags as soon as they could. Conquering heroes. There's destruction from above. Okay, we're going to get to the trophy pictures. I don't know which agent this is, but there's an agent from the surveillance house posing for pictures of Mount Carmel's burning in the background. There's a photo of one of the agents posing for a picture. There's a charred remain back there. That's a human body, and I'm going to show you. The next couple are going to be very graphic, guys, so I'm just going to warn you in advance. I thought that I had sent several other pictures of other agents posing in the same spot, but those pictures didn't come through. I guess they didn't make it on my computer. And I tried desperately to find the other pictures, but I don't have it here, but there's 3 other agents posing in the same place, taking the same picture in the same spot. So this isn't a one-off. This guy didn't just walk in a frame and take a picture. These guys posed for pictures with a dead body in the background. That's the body. I think it's Jimmy Riddle, but I would have to look into it. But that's the body. When you go back here, that's right there in the background. Then he's posing in front of this body. And again, they exist. You can see them on my website. There's 3 or 4 other agents that are posing in the exact same spot. There's the tough guy. All those buckets back there have human remains in them. But this is the kind of arrogance that I'm talking about that we saw throughout the course of the entire 51 days. There's another agent posing for a trophy picture. I'm not going to say who that is. Some of you may be able to guess. But yeah. Oh, is that Jesus? Oh no, that's me, sorry. That's me and Derek Lovelock with that, after being taken to jail. It was fun. I got to take a shower. The jail wasn't as bad. It's me and my mother. And that's one of the memorial stones that's out at the property of Mount Carmel today. It's got all the names of those that had died. That's what the bus looks like today. It's still buried underground. You can tell the tanks have run over it and destroyed it, but it's there.
And that's where a lot of the children were, right?
No, they were the concrete structure, not the bus. They were supposed to have been put in the bus, but I think the trap door was on the inside. I don't think anyone could have gotten to it because they destroyed it. They put so much debris everywhere in the building when the tanks went through, it cut off all these avenues of escape. Good picture of the destruction at the back of the building, however. Okay, I'm just going to go through this real quick. We're almost done. Amazing shot. We go on our way to jail. What Mount Carmel looks like today. One of the buildings that are on the property, the branch. I'm not going to talk about what's going on at Mount Carmel today, but it's not pretty. There's a guy out there who put this up, which is very offensive to all of us. We don't have control of the property at this point. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. We'll talk about that later. But last thing, I believe this to be the concrete structure, the base of the concrete structure where the kids were. And if you notice this crack in the foundation, there's a crack there. I think that's from the weight of a tank. But I'm not 100% sure. But it is a crack that goes from one side all the way to the other. It's very interesting.
Is that the structure? Aaron, can you turn on the mic?
Yeah, they destroyed the structure.
As I recall in your book, the children were placed in one of these concrete structures.
Yeah.
And the tank ran over it, and the process of the compression of the tank killed a lot of the children.
No, what happened was something happened at the roof. We think maybe the tank turret hit it and the roof caved in. And big blocks of concrete fell in on the kids and crushed many of them. They died of blunt force trauma. I just want to say that I'm going to open this up to questions, but here's my final story. So after the Justice Department came out, right before the Justice Department report came out, I was speaking to Rodney Crowe. Rodney Crowe was a member of he was a member of the coroner's office. He was heading the coroner thing. And I said, Rodney, what does all this mean? What is blunt force trauma? What is this? What am I looking at? He goes, listen, chunks of concrete fell in on the kids. They weren't beaten, nothing. It was chunks of concrete. And that's what our report's going to show. That night, the Justice Department went on, they did a news thing. And they had ABC, NBC, all the news agencies there, and they said, our report shows that the Branch Davidians beat and stabbed their children in the final moments of the conflagration. I was sitting in Maine with my uncle, and I said, beatings and stab? I just talked to Rodney Crowe. Here comes the PTSD again, guys. I'm like yelling, who do they think they're, how could they say that? I just talked to, and I was livid. If it were my TV, I would have thrown something at it, but I was at my uncle's house. The only thing that brought me back down to earth, and it was an amazing moment between my Uncle Bob and I, my uncle died recently, but Bob was in Vietnam, and he saw my reaction, and he amped it up even worse than I was. And he's like, that's the same shit they did to us in Vietnam. They kept lying and lying. And he's yelling and I'm yelling, and it calmed me down because I'm like, oh, cool, Unc, all right. And it brought me down, and he toned down. We toned down together. It was an amazing experience because I kind of needed that to realize what I was doing. I was totally out of control, right? But that's the kind of anger that you experience with this. And I thank my Uncle Bob for his service. He has since passed on. But that moment will always live with me, because he had the same frustration and the same anger that he'd never talked about or gotten it out before. But he saw what I went through, and it was very similar to his war experiences and his traumas that he had in life. Hi.
Thank you, David. Leave the screen down in case we want to look at the pictures. We've got a lot of questions and comments. Dr. Nicholson is going to join me here. And then we'll take questions from the audience. A few little comments that by the way, I'm so glad he wrote his book right after the occasion because there's so many details. In fact, when I asked him about his book, he had forgotten some of the details that were in there, but I had just read it. He wrote it 30 years ago. And the important lesson to learn is that write your book now because you might forget the details later. But nevertheless, a couple of comments I wanted to make. I talked to a number of law enforcement people with lots of experience, like 30, 40 years experience. And I said, how would you have handled this differently? I mean, it's easy to look back and be the Monday night quarterback, but I mean the Monday night, what they used to call them on, that you always knew more about the game than
Home.
armchair quarterback. Thank you. But they said that the main thing they would have done differently, they would have provided surveillance over I almost said compound, over the facility. They would have watched where Koresh went. And by the way, Koresh never until possibly the day of the first siege, had not committed any violent crime. So we're talking about Army tanks, helicopters for a crime that was nonviolent. Nevertheless, and so I told these law enforcement people, I said, now these are the facts. There were approximately 150 to 180 people in there. 3/4 of them were women and children. A number of them were elderly. A third of them were black who had come in from Jamaica and England and places like the Caribbean to study what their studies were. And nobody in there had a documented violent crime. Now, this is what they said. We would have put if those are the facts, elderly people, children, so forth, changed the ball game. We would have put surveillance people, undercover people watching where David Koresh went, when did he go to the store, when did he go to the barbershop, when did he go jogging. He was supposed to be a jogger. You know, they would have watched his patterns. That's when they would have arrested him, which is what they would have, these law enforcement people said, we've had experience where we wanted to arrest somebody, but we knew there were a lot of children inside the house. We did not want a confrontation with the children in there. So they watched him for weeks, or the people that they were, that was under their surveillance. And eventually they noticed a pattern, and that's when they nabbed their suspects. That's what they would have done down at Mount Carmel. They would have waited till Koresh went into town, went to the store. And then we have documentation that the ATF says they couldn't find him. They looked and looked and looked. He just showed documentation tonight, 9 days before the siege, that he was at the shooting range with the ATF people. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, you did a great job.
I read your book.
We showed the picture of the documentation. They said that he was dangerous. We never saw him. He never left his house. It's their own witness, their own affidavit. It's them being there, firing at the firing range with him. So, you know, they knew that he left. They knew him. He talked to him on a daily basis. They weren't afraid of him.
Now, two other little points I wanted to make, and then I'm going to bring Dr. Nicholson involved into the story. Notice the helicopters. Those helicopters were not supposed to be there, except if there was a documented case. Is it drug manufacturing?
Yeah, under the Posse Comitatus Act, I believe you can use military equipment against U.S. citizens if there's a drug nexus. It's part of the war on drugs.
But, so they used that as their argument to the commanding officer at Fort Killeen.
Yeah.
That there was drug manufacturing going on. Of course, after it was over with, there was absolutely no evidence of drug manufacturing or selling.
Correct. There wasn't. But that's how they got the permission to use the helicopters. It would have been illegal.
The second thing I wanted to make was that the CS gas, as you had correctly pointed out, 130 nations, including the United States of America, has agreed not to use that indoors. Now, they can use it outdoors under a very regulated specification, but never indoors, and never with children, ever. And it's so flammable that at the interaction of the CS gas with the kerosene fumes or the propane gases,
The propane tanks everywhere.
it would have gone up like a bomb. I talked to a physicist, a PhD in physics. I said, or chemist. I said, would you explain that? And after about an hour, I couldn't understand it anymore. But the bottom line is, it was so explosive. What they said, what the interaction, the synergy of those two chemicals, combining them together, is more explosive than a lot of bombs. And they would have warned the FBI not to use this gas, the CS gas. But by the way, that's what Hitler used in the Holocaust. They killed 6 million people. That's how dangerous it is. And yet they were gassing these people. So is that what is your understanding of what caused the fire? Because the FBI says David instructed y'all to set the place afire.
Sure, that's what they've said all along. There's a counter to everything that they've said. I'm going to start off with one person's testimony. There's only one person that I know of that has said that anyone had anything to do with a fire, and that was Graham Craddock, who said recently on Australian 60 Minutes that somebody lit a fire. But then if you further his testimony, he says that somebody said, put it outside. No, put it outside, that was said, put it outside, which indicates to me that maybe one of the tanks were coming through and someone was trying to combat that, maybe throw a Molotov cocktail. I don't know the details. All I know is the outside part I think is very important, because in the area that I was in, nobody was spreading fuel, nobody started a fire. Nobody that I've spoken to has admitted or told me that they started a fire, not Clive Doyle. Well, Sheila wasn't there, but not Derek Lovelock. He saw one of the fireballs, but he's denied it. Rennis, none of the survivors that were there has ever said that anyone inside started a fire. One of the things we know for sure is when Mike McNulty and William Gazecki did the movie Waco, The Rules of Engagement, the documentary that was nominated for an Oscar, they went into the evidence room in Austin, Texas, where all the evidence was kept, and they found 5 or 6 devices that were they were labeled silencers. They weren't silencers, they were pyrotechnic devices. They were there at the property, and the pyrotechnic devices were found in the evidence locker. The government said, well, after 3 years of denying that any pyrotechnics were used, they said, well, yeah, they were there, but we used them only in the big structure outside. We never used them in the building. You just denied it for years, saying there were absolutely no pyrotechnics used. Even the agents on the ground didn't believe pyrotechnics were used, because I saw one of them say there was no pyrotechnics in that building, screaming and yelling while I'm on my face before they arrested me. So, but somebody knew they were there, and they were used in the building. So you could say they were only used outside. I don't know that. All I know is there's 6 of them that have been unaccounted for all those years. And then finally, Janet Reno found out about them, and she had been lied to by the FBI, and she's very upset by it. But again, who cares? The system protects itself. Is anybody going to jail for it? Is anybody get a fine or being reprimanded for lying to the Attorney General of the United States? You would think that would get you in some kind of hot water, but it gets you raises and promotions if you're in the federal government. It's a lot like Hollywood. You can do terrible things and not only still have your career, but do better than ever. It's crazy. Any job that you and I hold, if we screw up that badly, you're gone, and you can't get another job.
You know, when the FBI first approached Janet Reno on the first day of her job, she turned down the plan. She didn't like it. The FBI went back and checked her judicial cases and noticed she had a soft spot for children. and came back at Attorney General Reno and said, oh, he's molesting children in there. And at that's when she changed her mind.
They said he was beating kids.
Beating children, that was it.
Beating. That there was beatings going on. That was not happening.
And you didn't see that?
No, there were spankings that I witnessed before the siege, not during the siege. But there was no heightened violence or anything like that. You know, most people today don't believe in spankings, but I think a lot of us in this, I see a lot of older people that I'm sure were subject to spankings. There was a generation when that was just a part of it, you know. And that's how it was done at Mount Carmel. It was done as it's a disciplinary action. David Koresh would get mad at the mothers if it was ever done out of anger. He didn't want the kids to ever be disciplined out of anger. It had to be totally controlled and emotionless. You're doing it as a discipline. I personally never spanked my kids. They're spoiled brats. I love them, but whatever. But I can't bring myself to do it, so that's just, you know.
Dr. Nicholson, do you have any questions? Comments?
Yes, I have some comments. Can I move up so I can see
Sure.
people? I think one of the things is by the way, I get no kickback from this. I would read his book. It really is fascinating. It's got a update in 2017, and it really is a fascinating read. And in some ways, whether you define it as a cult or not, however you feel about that, I don't have the same negative association of satanic. In some ways, it did seem to be like that, and in other ways, it didn't. In some ways, David Koresh did seem like a cult leader, and in some ways, he didn't. Yeah. A lot of times, cult leaders are very controlling and dominating. And the way you describe him was, in many ways, the opposite of that. He would invite the authorities in. He would say, you can come, you can go. There's nothing here that's going to keep you here. I mean, in other words, if you want to leave, you can leave. And so in some of those ways, he was very different. Now, in some ways, very charismatic, very likable. And, you know, in terms of if you want to define a cult as having unusual beliefs, I would say compared to traditional Christianity, some of those beliefs were unusual.
Sure.
But in many, many ways, he was not that way. Now, in other ways, very controlling. In terms of controlling, these are the rules that you have to live by, your dietary rules, your sexual rules. He had some very bizarre sexual rules. There was a time where he came up with another vision, he said, where the gentlemen cannot have sex with their wives anymore. He was going to have sex with their wives because he was going to populate the 24 elders. Is that correct? Because his children were going to be that way. Yeah. That's really controlling. And that's really unusual. And at that point, a lot of people left, but some people didn't. And some of the some of the wives that he had were teenagers, a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old. That's statutory rape. And so in some ways, he was very different, and in a good way, and in other ways, he was, I would say, pathologically sick in some ways. So it's a very complex, different picture than a lot of the cult leaders that I've heard of in the past. That was one of my comments.
He didn't seem to have the violent tendencies shown by Charles Manson at all.
Not only not violent, he was a kind father. He was gentle with his children. And you talked about him, interacting and playing. Yeah. That's just different. I mean, we want to deal with sound bites. We want to deal in black and white and easily defined categories. None of this case is easily defined categories.
No, it isn't.
Just tremendously sad. There is so much blame that righteously, accurately should be placed at the feet of the ATF and FBI. They horribly botched this. And David Koresh had an agreement with the FBI that was negotiated that if you play, and correct me if I get this wrong, if you play this 58-minute piece of material on his teaching on the 7 seals, I will come out. We haven't negotiated. It's all set up. and he backed out of it. Why did he back out of it? Because he said he heard from God to wait. All you had to do was to comply with what you agreed with. None of this would have happened. It is just tremendously sad. And if the ATF had conducted themselves and the FBI like reasonable, rational agents of the government, none of this would have happened. So it's just very, very sad to me and very complex. And your book does a very nuanced job. The other thing I like about your book is that you document it. It's just not your opinion. You reference judicial hearings of the Senate, and you cite professors and law professors and sociological professors. To me, it's one of the things that gives your book credibility, because it's not just your subjective opinion, which is valuable, but if it was only your subjective opinion, I would be less likely to trust it, but it's not.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Dr. Nicholson.
Oh, please, yes, Dr. Nicholson. Yes.
Let's talk about the word cult for a second. You mentioned it, and just immediately after it happened, and I remember this well, they kept talking about these cultists, cultist Koresh, cultist this, cultist that. And I was actually swayed by it, because the word cult conjured up images for me of Jonestown and Guyana. It conjured up images of Charles Manson. And so consequently, I started to think, well, but the concern I have is that, the next group might be your church, or your synagogue, or your temple. We never know who's going to be next. I mean, just because these people had different beliefs than what you might have or I might have, it doesn't mean that we go in there with army tanks and helicopters. And the only, and I studied this backwards and forwards, trying to be as fair as I could to all sides. The only alleged crimes that he might have had is possibly taking guns, semi-automatics, and converting them to fully automatics, which admittedly is against the law. I would be fined $2,000 and maybe put on probated sentence for 90 days. They bring in the Army for that. The other alleged crime is possibly the statutory rape. Now, see, Texas has a different law. If the parents give parental consent, a 14-year-old can marry a 50-year-old guy. And in that particular case, the parents of the 14-year-old lived at Mount Carmel. Is that correct?
Yeah. Listen, Mount Carmel was like a time machine. It was like, these people are living in the Scripture. They believe in the Scripture, and if it's in the Scripture, it's okay. Once the girl reaches puberty, it's okay to procreate, as it was way back then, thousands and thousands of years ago. We look at things very, very differently now. Thank God. 14-year-old girl isn't ready to make that decision.
And a 12-year-old to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it gets pretty sick.
I agree.
And so it's just
I wish that instead of burning the place down and killing everyone, that they would have gotten him outside and he would have had to face the judicial system and face his accusers and face his crime, rather than just being killed and destroyed and demonized to the point where it was okay to go in and destroy that community. Mm-hmm. So can I say something about that real quick?
Yes.
There's a famous quote I love from history. It says Senator Henry Clay said in the 1800s that the devices of power and its minions are the same in all countries and in all ages. First, it marks its victim and denounces it, exciting the public hatred to conceal its own abuses and encroachments. And so when you think about that's exactly what they did. My mother has said in the past, and I think it's a valid point, is David Koresh worked with people days, weeks, months, and years. Some people were with him for decades to get them to be with him, to be with the group, to accept the social structure of the group. The FBI controlled the entire world in 51 days. to the point at the end, even though you saw a tank go through someone's building and you saw gas being thrown into the building, right? You saw all that, but the conditioning was, if a bunch of religious fanatics want to kill themselves, what can the federal government do about it? Obviously, the truth and the reality of what really happened are far more bigger than that little soundbite. We did not talk about the infrared video. Really quickly, there's an infrared video. The plane flying above the building, the FBI plane had infrared. They were filming it. And they have, you can see this, it's on the rules of engagement, if anyone wants to care to see that documentary. But make a long story short, again, with me, when the tank goes through the building and comes out, that at the back of the building, that thing comes down, you see two huge explosions. Derek Lovelock saw a fireball go from the back to the front, right, to the chapel area. Then you see a classic tank move. The tank's parked. You can see the plume, the white plume, because it's like black and white. And then you see these flashes going off next to it. Fully automatic weapons fire. When the place starts burning, you see fully automatic weapons fire going off from a couple different positions at the back of the building. Something like, I think the expert counted 67 different flashes. So you're shooting into the back of the building. Why? If they want people to come out and people are trying to escape the back, why would you shoot into the back of the building if you want people to come out? Why were there so many autopsy reports that had bullet holes in the center of the head and the center of the chest? There was a lot of them. I always wondered that, and I got the answer until I saw the infrared video, and then it made sense to me. The government has said that was sunlight reflections. That's not fully automatic weapons fire. Anyone who has ever shot a firearm can look at that tape and know that it's fully automatic weapons fire. It just is. This has been totally, other than the documentary coming out, ABC, NBC, no one's ever talked about it. It's never been talked about. It's been talked about publicly by me, but I'm a cult leader, right? I mean, I'm not a cult leader. Oh my God, did I just say that? I'm a cultist. Hey, come join the Tibidians. Anyway, my point is that I'm not starting the Tibidians, by the way. That is not. My point is that I was discredited early on just for being there. So, like I said, most people didn't want to hear what I had to say. That's why I wrote the book. I was frustrated. I was angry, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to let them get the last word. At least, I may be a pariah for the rest of my life just for being there, but I'm not going to take this laying down. And I wrote a book, and I get accused often of writing a book to make money off this tragedy, and I'm like, I didn't make any money for 20, it wasn't until it was made into a series, which I had no control over whatsoever. I made this out of complete desperation and anger. I was gonna go down fighting. And I wasn't gonna leave this world without calling them on their BS and saying, you guys brought tanks in and killed a bunch of kids and women and men and people who believed in God. They had a deep belief in God, maybe very different than yours, but it was scripturally motivated. It was 100% scriptural. And some of that scriptures, when you really get into some of the minor prophets and the prophets, it's some of that stuff's very scary, and it's not like you consider when you think of the good book, you think of Christianity. There's some very dark things in that scripture, and that was all confronted and talked about at Mount Carmel, and it was all part of the community. But so again, obviously very different than maybe what your family's used to, but nonetheless, these people believed in God to the point where they put their lives on the line and they were killed for it. I consider them martyrs. So instead of, they were so misaligned, they were so dehumanized. These people were martyrs that died for their faith, and they died for God. They did not die for David Koresh. They died for the words in that book that they believed were the plan of God. And so that's it. They can't say that for themselves, so I will say it for them. And that's just how I see it. That's what I believe, and I think that they shouldn't be so maligned. That there's a lot of honor for dying for your faith, for standing up to such tyranny. And all these years later, again, the justice, the lack of justice, the fact that the system protects itself. I mean, to the younger people in the crowd or the audience that might be watching this, the system's going to protect itself. There's nothing you can do about it. They can say you have every constitutional right to have the right to a fair hearing, a fair trial. The truth is, if you don't have the money for a good attorney, you're going to get somebody who the court's going to appoint, that already has a caseload where maybe they give 15 minutes to each person because they are underfunded. The Justice Department has all the money in the world. Public defenders have nothing. And so you get a lot of people that are poor in jail because they can't afford a good defense. Not that they're guilty or innocent. They can't afford a good defense.
David, in your
It's all
book,
about-
you mentioned that one of the ladies who lost her daughter at Mount Carmel lived in Israel. And she was just shocked that her daughter, I think the lady had been in the Holocaust, and her daughter came over here to live at Mount Carmel, and died. She was shocked that that happened. She said that's what happened, and
I think you think of Pablo Cohen's mother. That's the only Israeli that I know of. Pablo Cohen was the bass player that played for David, and his mother was in Israel. I think she came over for this. She talked to my mother at length.
she did.
Yeah.
You want to do questions from the audience?
One last question of you. For people who suffer from PTSD, do you have a quick, easy answer?
Get help. But there are some very, very significant answers in terms of that have even gone beyond traditional psychology over the last 30 years. One of them is called Eye Movement Desensitization Response, EMDR, which uses bilateral stimulation to help people process the memories. It doesn't erase the memories, but what it does is it takes the pain away from the memories so that you can remember them without being triggered. And so there's some very significant advances that have happened, ironically, within the last 30 years, because it was 29 years ago, I think next Tuesday.
Correct.
Is the 19th, that offer a lot of hope. And I would really suggest that people look into that. And there's more than just EMDR, but there really is a lot of help out there.
Questions from the audience? I'll bring the microphone to you, and this is where I get my exercise. But this is a library. You can say what you want. Questions up here. You got a question? Okay.
I'd like to know what part CPS had in this case.
What part did CP Child Protective Services have?
Yeah, they had interviewed the kids, had talked to David and come out on 2 occasions, and they could not find enough evidence to arrest David or anybody there, and they dropped their case. So twice the state, from people like Mark Bro, some of the people that have left, did an investigation, and they just didn't have enough evidence. They had to drop their case. But again, this is the same thing that the ATF and the FBI used to consistently demonize David to, in part, bring about the final ending. Good question. Thank you.
I have a few questions, but I would like to just maybe put it in another way. Do you in any way hate Bill Clinton for all this?
I'm no
Because I think
fan.
he sucks.
I'm no fan of any of them, frankly. Here's the deal. Every president has to make certain decisions and do whatever. The ATF, the ATF started the investigation, I believe, before Bill Clinton was even in office. So people want to make it a very political thing. I'm no fan of, like I said, both the radical left and the radical right, both scream very loudly and use miscommunication and propaganda to both very bad things that are very wrong have been said about me personally from both sides. So it's kind of hard for me to have faith in either of them. I hated Janet Reno for a long time. I'm no fan of the Clinton administration. I'm particularly unfond of George Stephanopoulos because at the time he was probably the guy that wrote that quote, that soundbite. He was the soundbite guy for the Clintons. But when Janet Reno died recently, I did a lot of thinking. And I wanted to say something on my Facebook page about it, and I did. And I mentioned what she had done, and she was lied to, and I'm not justifying anything. I hated her for that decision. And at the end, I said that I forgive Janet Reno. and I hope that God can. And I get a lot of people very mad at me for forgiving Janet Reno, but at the end of the day, I know how, despite the fact that I'm incredibly handsome and talented, I know how screwed up I am, right? So, how can I judge anyone else for the decisions that they have to make? So I have to forgive. That's just it. I mean, I believe in God, and I believe we're all screwed up down here, and we need a heck of a lot of forgiveness. So I wish nothing but the best for anyone who has survived this. I just would like some justice in this world, which isn't going to happen, so I have to look forward to the justice in the next world to come and hope that God will save people out of it that maybe even don't deserve to be saved. I don't know. That's just the best way I can. It's hard. I took a lot of time for me to forgive her. So therefore, in that coin, I have to forgive Clinton and everyone else. Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they do. You know, maybe they do know. Who knows? We'll find. It'll come out in the wash. That's what a person of faith really thinks. It'll come out in the wash.
Back here.
Okay, it's kind of a two-part question. When David Koresh is there, did you have to have a chain of command to be around him or be able to speak with him, or was he just like in the middle of the crowd?
No, he was just around. I mean, it's like, you know, if we were building the house, he was out there pounding the nails with us. He didn't live in a veil behind and just show up for the, you know.
During the siege.
No, just in general, first of all, I get to that point. And during the last hours of the siege, where were you at according to where David was at the time?
For the whole 6 hours, I was in the chapel area.
Okay, and where was David at?
He was upstairs, I believe, I think that he was in the room that was the first floor of where the concrete structure was. Where the concrete structure was, there was a tower. I think he was on the first floor of that tower, is my understanding, or in the hallway.
Was there some kind of communication between everybody?
Nope.
Not at all.
Everyone was cut off. And when the tanks started coming in, everything was really cut off. I couldn't get to the cafeteria area. I tried to go upstairs to get to the cafeteria area. All of the stairs were down because of the tanks.
I might point out that he was pretty badly wounded and couldn't.
Early on, he made a miraculous recovery about 3 days in, though. He was wounded in the side, and there was a time where he was pretty delirious. We didn't think he was going to make it, but he did.
Any questions, comments, protests? Okay, over here.
So you talk about the flammable gas, or the part of the gas that was flammable. Do you think that was a deliberate action on them to burn down the building, or do you think that was more of like an incompetence to burn down the compound or burn down the facility?
Let me say it this way. Nobody benefited greater from that building burning than the government. That's the best way I could say it. I can't answer that question. Because it would seem like I try to be as open-minded as possible. I have to be honest because that's all I have. This is a tough subject. And my fantasy is to run away, live on an island, never have to talk about it again. But then there's nobody to talk for all those people that are gone. I just can't do that. But I don't know. I know that when there's 6 or 7 pyrotechnic devices that are found in the building after it being denied that any were even used at all, that's pretty suspect to me. So that's that. But on the same token, I can't say that someone on the other side of the building didn't start a fire. I can't say that. I wasn't there on that side of the building. And frankly, there's that one testimony of Graham Craddock troubles me greatly because nobody else, none of the survivors have looked me in the eye and said that they had any hand in starting a fire. And I didn't see anyone pour fuel or start a fire. So it's hard. It's very hard for me to believe that that's what happened.
For a religious facility, why was there such a strong presence of arms?
Because everyone there was very much Texan and very much well, actually, here's how that's a good question. Let's talk about how that first started. That first started back in the days of Roden, back when there was that gun battle. And when this is how David expressed it to me. When he first went to the sheriff's department and said, this guy has dug up a corpse, because David was looking to get George off the property, right? I mean, he had a majority of the people that were with him. So when he went there and he said, this guy's dug up a corpse, isn't that illegal? The guys at the sheriff's department said, yeah, but we need more evidence. And then as he was leaving, one of them said, you all be careful, there's some dangerous customers out there. And so that was a sign for them, okay, well, we better go out armed. The sheriff's department has said so. That's how they looked at that. So they went out, some of them bought firearms. And they went out, they had that thing with Roden. But really the catalyst is David Koresh met a guy named Henry McMahon, who was a licensed firearms dealer, Hewitt Handguns. And David went to gun shows, bought a few firearms from him, and then Henry's like, listen, you guys are there's a bunch of stuff coming down the pike. They're gonna pass some law against .223 rounds, so they're gonna go up in value. This particular firearm, these are all gonna go up in value. They're great investments right now because they're getting ready to ban some things and make some things to where you can't buy them anymore. And so there were people that were kind of more entrepreneurial, like Paul, and some of the younger guys were kind of into that and going with the gun show, so they started to formulate it as a business, and they started to buy legally and sell. That's why Henry McMahon was raided by the ATF. And the ATF were asking a lot of questions about David. Henry got on the phone with David and said, David, the ATF are here, and they're asking me a lot of questions about you. And David said, well, put them on the phone. Henry, I'll talk to them. Better yet, have them come on out. They can check any yellow sheets they want to check. Yellow sheet is the sheet that the person who buys the firearm keeps. It's duplicate. One goes to the government, one goes to the firearms dealer, and the other goes to the person buying the firearm. So he invited them out. And Sarabin, I guess, one of the ATF guys, I think it was Sarabin, but I could be wrong, went, hang up. He wanted him to hang up. He didn't want David to know that he was on the other, that they were there. So right there, David invited them out, and they chose not to go out. So they were invited out on several occasions. But initially it was for protection under the Roden thing, but then it got amplified when they found out that it could be a business.
And that's how they made money for their for the group, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And if I'm remembering correctly, on the morning of the February 28th, they, rather than stockpiling the arms as you might if you knew you were going to be attacked, didn't somebody two people, I think a father and a son, took a load of the guns out to sell at a local gun show? And so you're giving away some of the firearms that you theoretically could use against the people who are going to attack you. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think like a quarter or something of the guns were gone to be sold.
So that's, to me, because I had a very negative view of the Branch Davidians, and it was mainly because I only heard what the media told me. The more you learn about it, the more complex the picture gets.
Yeah. And that's it. I just want people to know that not everyone in there we were just not a bunch of idiots, and we followed David because his eyes glowed. There were very deep reasons for people being there. And people, again, it comes back to, to me, it comes back to the complexity of the Bible. The Bible is far more complex than people want to think that it is. Especially this day and age, you get a lot of people that are just like, that's some old archaic document. It doesn't mean anything, and there's a lot of atheism. There's a lot of people out there that just don't. Faith isn't what it is. It's not what it used to be. It's like it used to be everything. And you have a right to question all things. Obviously, I just wanted to know what the Bible meant. I just wanted to know what it really said. I didn't know it was going to open up some weird Pandora's box that I was going to step into. It was going to take my life over and then become all this. I had no idea. I just wanted to know what it said.
Yes, my question is, in the back of the house, there is a very large pool. And around the pool, there was a sentence that was written, and it was a run-on sentence that if you walked all the way around the pool, you could read it. I was just wondering if you knew who the creator or instigator that was? Or,
that's the first I've ever heard that. That's fantastic. Do you know what it said?
It's like paragraphs. It was a sentence, and then it kept going, and they'd go all around the pool, and then they kept doing it a couple of times. And I just thought it'd be interesting to know. Well,
let me ask you. In the concrete, because I've been on that pool several times, I've never seen that.
It's on the side of the concrete. It's on the decking, if you would, 2-foot decking.
Well, there's a part on the pool where the steps are that has the initials DK. David Koresh put his initials in it, and I have pictures of that somewhere, not here today. But yeah, that was interesting, but I never knew about like a whole paragraph. I'll look into that.
It's probably not no diving, right? It's
Yeah, about 100 times. Well, thank you for that, and I've enjoyed this tonight very much.
Thank you.
Can you tell me about the civil lawsuit?
With the National Enquirer? He was talking about the,
Yeah, that was,
before you answer that question, he's the only one I know, there's been others, but he's the only one I know that took on the National Enquirer and won. Tell him about the National Enquirer.
well, they had to pay me because they wouldn't shut up. And they basically said that I had said things that I didn't. They said that they had a family member that, had I said any of the stuff that they said that I said, I'd be in jail. And I didn't say any of that to any family member, so I think somebody made it up and then got paid or whatever. But I sued him, and it didn't get to court, but it just...
Now, what he was talking about,
He's talking about the civil
interrupted,
case.
but
Yeah, I know what he's talking about.
the lawsuit between the state of Texas and,
Yeah. Well, what was troubling about that is we had this case against the government for the wrongful death of all these people. That's supposed to be our day in court. And so we went to that, me and my friend John. I think it was, I don't know if it was in San Antonio. I think it was somewhere else, actually. I can't remember where. But the criminal case was in San Antonio. The judge was Walter Smith. They gave us the same judge in the civil case that gave these guys 40 years on a weapons violation that the jury thought was thrown out. So this Judge Walter Smith was also the judge in the civil case. We're like, no way, this guy has been totally one-sided. He hates us. What? We can't get another judge? There was no way to get out of it. So the system gave us the same judge that had already whitewashed everything in the civil case. So, and I'll give you examples. We had expert witnesses that were supposed to testify on our behalf, people that are like fire marshals. The judge would allow them on the stand. We had the flare expert. The judge wouldn't allow them on the stand. There were so many of our witnesses that weren't allowed to even testify that the jury never heard any of that. Needless to say, it was found in favor of the government and closed. There was never any justice there. So it was like being railroaded twice by the system. And you're like, wow, you guys, you can't even have a civil case against the government. And get
one
justice.
fact that startled me in your book was the fact that you mentioned that Koresh asked for legal representation to meet with his attorney during the 51-day siege, and they wouldn't allow that.
Well, no, they actually did at one point. Of course, Dick DeGuerin and Jack Zimmerman. Jack Zimmerman represented Steve Schneider. Dick DeGuerin represented Koresh, came in on two or three occasions.
During the siege?
Yes.
I misread that wrong.
And actually saw all of the evidence on the inside. DeGuerin saw, and I asked him this at great length, this question. He saw the bullet holes in the ceiling that came from helicopters, that came from above. I said, well, how do you know that, Dick? He said, well, when sheetrock is hanging down like this, that indicates that it's being shot from above down in. And I'm like, well, you're right. So we got that detailed. He absolutely believes, and he saw all the bullet holes in the front door that were coming from the outside in. So he absolutely believes that the helicopters were firing. And that's an outside witness, if you will. Same thing with Jack Zimmerman.
Well, was that correct that maybe at some point that after that they weren't allowed in?
Yeah, at some point after that. I can't remember which, though.
Do you remember, Dr. Nicholson?
No, I don't know.
Okay, questions, comments, protests?
How long were you there for, and what was a typical day like?
I knew the group for about a year, and I joined and lived at Mount Carmel for about a year. The typical day, well, it was easier early on, but as more people started coming from England, he decided to get rid of all those little houses and build one big place. So during the day, we all pitched in building the place. So we were carpenters, literally. And we built the place from scratch. We took those little houses down and then built the big place. So the day would start with a bell ringing. It's like on a farm. The bell rang, that's when you came for breakfast. You had breakfast, and then you had maybe a half hour before, then you went out and you started working. You'd work till the lunch bell, then you'd eat lunch, and then you'd work to the dinner bell, and then everyone would have dinner and would go do their own thing, and then David Koresh would go on the stage and start playing guitar. When David Koresh went on the stage and started playing guitar, that was the cue for the musicians to go on stage and jam. And we had about an hour, just about an hour every night, where after dinner, we would play music with David. When the music was over, everyone would start filing in, and that's when the study began. And almost every night, a few exceptions, when he's either traveling or not feeling well, there would be a study. And the guy was incredibly devoted to the scripture and to what it said and what it meant. And the studies would be, okay, what do the Psalms really say? Let's read Psalms 13. Let's read Psalms 69. Let's read Psalms, let's go 1 to 10 tonight. And what does this say? What does this mean? This guy's got this, he's holding a book in his right hand. What is that book? That's the book sealed with 7 seals that God gives the Lamb. And he goes on. And so it was always about what the scripture said. What does Hosea say? We're going to take a whole night talk about Hosea. Well, how is that like what Isaiah says over here? That he'd skip around Hosea and say, Isaiah, and you'd read a whole chapter, and you're like, oh my God, that's the same story with a little bit more. And that went on every night, hours and hours and hours. So usually, if it were the Feast of Tabernacles or Atonement, the festival days is when the intense studies were. 10, 12-hour studies a day, because people were coming from all over to learn the seals. He had 2 weeks where he gave these intense studies.
I might tell them that y'all celebrated the Passover and a lot of the Jewish holidays.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, Leviticus. So we didn't eat pork. There was no shellfish. It was very much. It's very much a Jewish and Christianity combined. Very different. But it was very much Old Testament. There's a lot of Old Testament. We spent a lot of time really studying the Old Testament, what it meant.
Dr. Nicholson, you look like you had a point.
That was deceptive. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Question, how were you treated during your initial captivity, interrogations, incarcerations, et cetera? By the feds, by the local cops, et cetera?
Yeah.
And second part, I've never been down there, but if we were to go down there today, would we have access? Does someone own it? Do they charge a fee? What's it like today?
Oh boy, you asked the good questions. Here we go. Let's hope to avoid this. Okay, the first one's easy. I was treated much better than I thought I would be. I was yelled at. Where are the kids? Tell us where the kids are. You're going to live with us for the rest of your life. I'm thinking the same thing. You guys can live with us for the rest of your life, but whatever, okay. They're in the underground structure. They should be in the bus. You guys know about the bus. We tear gassed the bus. I'm like, oh my God, they tear gassed the bus. So, okay. And then the one FBI agent says to the other FBI agent, I knew this wasn't going to work. We should have gone with plan B. And then they said, do you think they set the fire? And he goes, you're damn right they set the fire. There wasn't one effing pyrotechnic in that building. That's a direct quote, by the way. So yes, there wasn't one pyrotechnic in that building. They set the fire. That's interesting to me now, years later, because that FBI agent, who was very sincere and very angry, did believe any pyrotechnics were used. I don't think many of the agents knew what was really going on. I think only those that had known knew, because we know that there were pyrotechnic devices used there. They absolutely were in evidence, though. They are absolutely used there. They were expended. So I'm almost done. I'm not done quite. Sorry. So anyway, then they gave me to the ATF guys, which was a little more terrifying. The worst thing they did to me, which why would you do that? But whatever. Everyone took my thumb and fingerprints, like all 10 prints. Every step of the way, I got printed over and over again. But the most disturbing thing the ATF did is they stripped me down naked and then filmed my naked body, and then gave me the orange jumpsuit to wear, and then they took me to the Waco County Jail, where we stayed for some time. I was held as a week or two as a material witness. I wasn't indicted, so then they released me.
What was the main source of income to house, feed, and clothe a group that size for year after year?
Sure. There were a few people that came into the group that were very, very wealthy, and they gave everything to the group. Paul Fata was one. He was a multimillionaire, owned Handy Van Lines out of Hawaii. There were other people that were entrepreneurs. Some people were very, Wade Martin. Everyone gave to the group. You didn't have to, though. Like in a case like mine, they actually paid all my bills for being the musician, so I didn't pay anything. Many people didn't have to pay anything. It was you gave what you felt it was worth. If you were 100%, you gave 100%. David, but here's one of the other interesting things about him. He wouldn't just take someone who just listened to him preach and then give them, maybe want to give $1,000. He'd be like, no, I can't take your money. It's all or you're either in or you're not. So I don't want $1,000. I don't, he wasn't interested in that. He was looking for a group of people that really wanted to know and that were willing to be 100%, not just financially, but spiritually and physically. You're in.
And to me, that's incredibly different than what I have in my mind as the prototypical cult leader or pastor. I'm not going to take $1,000. What? That's unbiblical.
Yeah, you're all in. Like Christ told his followers, if you want to follow me, pick up your cross and follow me. It's similar. It's 100%.
What motivates people to join a cult? Because some of them were from very good families, highly educated, and then it seemed to run the gamut. So I'm really curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. And here's what I think. I think especially today, if you look at the young people today, kids, young people, even older people. But I have a lot of people that get in touch with me that they long for a community like Mount Carmel, believe it or not. They feel very isolated. They feel very alone. They feel like their government doesn't love them. They feel like their parents have lied to them. They feel that their teachers have lied to them. They feel that society is just not at all what it was cut out to be, that what they were told as kids isn't true. They feel very maligned. They want a community of like-minded people. I get all the time people get in touch with me wanting that community. People come out to Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel, the property, that's a good question. We'll get back to that too. The property of Mount Carmel is like a magnet for people. I meet people all the time that say, this affected me in ways I can't even understand. I don't know why I'm here, but I had to come here. David Thibodeau, I don't know why I had to reach out to you and I had to send you this letter, but I had to. And you responded, oh my God, I can't. Most of the time they can't believe. I'm like, I'm just David Thibodeau. Oh my God, I'm not, I'm not anything special, but people, they see something. There's something very powerful there. They want that community. And so it's very touching to me. But that place has got a power. That place attracts some straight up psychos and some very amazing angels. I've seen both.
He mentions the younger people wanting letters, wanting to join a group or something?
Well, they want a community. They want to feel like they're part of a community.
What do you think the attraction is?
Well, some of the research says that sometimes it's because people are at a vulnerable point of their life. Either things have gone wrong for them, for some of them, they don't have a really firm identity. They're kind of rootless at that time, and they're looking for some kind of a structure. For sometimes they've come from an unstable or idiosyncratic kind of family, and they're looking for that kind of community because they didn't have it in their early years. A lot of times it's because, sometimes they have a family member that's in the cult. Sometimes it's because they want to improve. I mean, it's not all negative reasons. In fact, the desire for a community is not a negative reason, but it's usually coming from some kind of a lacking, but not always.
Like I said, for me, I didn't want it at all. That's the last thing I wanted was to join a religious community. I was having a great time. I had long hair. I was in a band playing in L.A. Well, I'm going to give it all up, become Father Dave. No, it was not what I was looking for at all. But I knew there was a power to the Bible. I knew that being a student of history, my dad was a history teacher, why did so many people fight and die for this book? Why were the Crusades? Why did the Crusades happen? Why have so many people sacrificed themselves for a religion, for a God? The Muslims have a God. The Christians have a God. the Buddhists have Buddha, and the more militant, the more they're going to fight each other to gain control and to be able to reach a larger audience, if you will. So it was the power of the scriptures, the fact that why would so many, what is it about this book that makes people want to give all and die for this deity that we don't see or talk to? I just wanted to know what it really said.
Didn't you say also that the group could give you some direction and guidance at a point in your life where you were still young and kind of looking for your way?
I wasn't looking for that way.
Right.
But again, it came down to the fact that I listened, and the more I learned, the more I knew I wanted to learn. And the more I wanted to learn, the more I couldn't believe how incredibly deep this was. And the more I had to say, this book isn't what I thought it was. Number one, it's dirty. Number two, it's life. It's everything is incorporated in here. Armies, kingdoms, people dying, sexual proclivities. The story of Lot is insane. If you read past the whole thing about the salt, her turning to the salt, keep going a little further. It gets even wackier. It gets into all that stuff. It's just, this is not the book I thought it was at all. But I also found a wisdom in it and some, beautiful truths in that scripture that the Holy Spirit feminine absolutely blew me away, even to this day. So it's just like, the more I wanted to know, the more I became convicted, but the more I knew that I couldn't walk away. And then there was a point where you get to where it's like, okay, I have to either say this is of God or it isn't. If I walk away, am I walking away because I want to? Because I'm walking away from God. And within my own conductive reasoning within myself, I had to say, no, I believe this is of God. And if I'm walking away from it, I'm doing it selfishly. I'm doing it because I want to pursue my own things. But God has called me, God has touched me, and he's saying, this is the path I want for you. And I had to say, okay, this is the path that God wants for me. I'm going to go with it. And you asked me this question earlier, and this is the best way I can say this. People say all the time, don't you regret being there? Don't you regret that was your life and that you lived that? Don't you regret it? Don't you wish you didn't ever go eat the red pill? And this is how I look at Mount Carmel. I wouldn't wish my experience on my worst enemy. I wouldn't want anyone to ever have to go through what I went through. But I wouldn't give it up for all the money in the world either, my experience. You couldn't tempt me to take my experience away for $1 billion. My experience was given to me to go through this. There's no doubt in my mind that I was meant to go through this and be the witness. There was one day I was sitting in the room right before it was during the siege. And I'm in a room with David, Steve, and a couple other people. And I said, David, I don't care if we all go to jail or, if they shoot us or we all die or whatever happens, I don't care. I just don't want to be away from the group. And David looked at me and he didn't say anything, and he just looked at me and he looked at me. And he looked at me in a way where I said, oh, because he told me what was going to happen without telling me. And I knew I was going to survive. I knew that I was not going to be touched and that I was going to have to face the world alone and face my experience and tell people. I knew that I was going to be a witness right then and there. And it doesn't mean that I didn't still fear. When the tanks were coming in, I thought I was dead. When at 10:30 in the morning, when the press came on and they said that Mount Carmel is being raided, that they're putting in tear gas in hopes that the people come out, they said the FBI has reported that their CEVs have received 80 to 200 gunshots against them. And my heart sank then, because I was in the chapel all day. Nobody shot at the tanks. I didn't hear one gunshot the whole day, not one. How would I not hear gunshots? Where are the 80 to 200 gunshots against the CEVs? There were none. And so, to be fair to the government, the FBI guys that were in the tanks say they were fired at. I did not hear it, and that's when I lost hope. And in this world of all things, when you lose hope, that's the worst experience you could ever have. Hope. You could be in the worst situation and have hope that you're going to get out of it. But once that hope's gone, you're dead. It's over. And with that losing hope was the most deflating thing I've ever experienced in my life.
You mentioned, I believe it was in your book or someplace else, that you had to make a quick decision to burn up or get shot. Can you elaborate on that just a second or two?
As the fire grew and grew and grew, I started going from the chapel to the back area. The back area was between the chapel and the gym. There was a hallway. It's where David had a lot of sound equipment and stuff. But we were all in that little hallway, and one of the tanks had come through and destroyed the window, so there's a big hole there. And some people were going to go out of the hole. And I'm like, I'm not going out that hole. They're going to shoot me. I thought for sure if I went out that hole, they were going to shoot me. No questions asked, that we were dead. And so we all waited. Nobody wanted to get shot, so we're sitting in there waiting and waiting. I look to my right, and there's Wayne Martin. And the smoke's coming in. And the smoke's coming in. Wayne Martin is leaning. He's standing up and he's leaning against the wall. He takes his gas mask off and he goes down and he goes down in the crouched position where he's sitting on his feet. And then the smoke covered him and I couldn't see him anymore. And then I felt the side of my hair singe because that wall was now catching fire. And with the side of my hair singed, I said, okay, it's now or never. And I looked out the window. Jamie Casillo and Derek Lovelot had gone out the window. And at that point I said, I don't want to burn to death. So I'd much rather be shot, so I'm out. I went out the window, my hands up. I was not shot. It surprised me. I expected fully to be shot. So that was it. Do I want to be shot or burned? I'd much rather be shot than to burn to death. That was just too horrendous for me to have faced.
Question back here.
So you mentioned that you felt that everyone was looking at the Bible and they were following God.
Yeah.
But on the other side, you kind of mentioned that, it was the government that kind of brought everyone together during that process. So could you explain kind of more your thinking as to, several people left, several people stayed, but what was the thinking of staying versus leaving? Was it do what you want, or was there, kind of a united front that everyone would stay until the end?
No, there was do what you want. You could leave whenever you wanted to leave. But the truth is, my belief is, and I can't speak for everyone, my belief is that, like me, if you left that building, you weren't leaving David Koresh, you were leaving God's message. And that's a very powerful thing. It's like, how do you look at God and give him the middle finger and say, I'm going to go do my own thing because I fear for my life? And this great question. It brings me to the next thing about faith, and specifically people that are incredibly religious. Like, we wonder why can people get on a plane and smash a plane into some buildings for their God? How can they go in and blow themselves up and kill a bunch of other people for their God? Because it's justified in their religion that if they kill the heathen, or it's not heathen, the infidels, right? That they go to heaven, and they're, it's a great honor to be a martyr, right? That's when you're talking about religion in general and people that study the scripture twice a day, 3 times a day, they pray to Mecca. I'm using Muslims as an example at this point, but it can be any religion. Anyone who is that, and I'll say radicalized where that scripture and that word becomes your entire life and your entire world. There's much worse fates than dying, walking away from that and being an apostasy in the eyes of your God that you worship and love so much. That could be a much worse fate. And you can go out into the world and think about these things, and it's always on your mind and you never let it go. I mean, that can be a much worse fate for a lot of people of faith. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. It's like you almost need a proper balance. I'm against radicalization of anything now. My philosophy now, being the 53-year-old Dave Thibodeau, and we talked about this earlier, is if your God is all that powerful and all that great, put your gun away. You don't need to go chop someone's head off for your God. Let your God come down and do it. At this point, I would say that to David. Why don't you let God come down and set the kingdom up? Why you, or anyone? Well, if your God's so powerful, let your God take care of the situation. Stop killing other people. Stop bullying other people. Stop looking at someone who doesn't share your sexuality and looking down on them and making their lives hard because they are who they are. People who are who they are, let them be. That's just the way I look at it now, and I have a problem with radicalization. That's a very scary thing.
By the way, before I come over there, this program is brought to you by the Friends of the Allen Public Library. The best way you can become my friend is become a friend. And this lady right here wrote the check.
Thank you for that, by the way.
This is a very simplistic question. I remember the events. I never have had it clear in my mind why the U.S. government did not want this to exist. Clearly, it did not. And I've never been able to deal with that. I've heard all the different explanations you've given of what went on at the camp and how long it took. I remember all those things, but I don't know what threat it posed to the U.S. government that they had to go to such extremes to eradicate it. I just don't understand it. Can you speak to that?
That's not a simple question at all, and that's a great question.
Please take another hour.
I thank you so much for that question, because literally we could really go off on this one, guys. I look at this as a very spiritual thing, even to this day. I talked to David about this greatly. I doubt the scripture a lot. There's a big part of me that is just like, I doubt at this point the whole thing. I study a lot of biblical archaeology and a lot of the things that are coming out in the world. We don't know what this world is anymore, okay? We're finding cultures that exist in the rainforest and we didn't even know were there. We're finding out that mankind has been here not only a lot longer than 6,000 years, but a lot longer than 60,000 years, maybe 100, maybe 200,000 years. We don't know anything. It's crazy what we don't know. So, not to be simplistic here, but looking at it as someone who went through that experience, David had a truth. He presented a very hard truth. At one point he said, you guys could all kill me for what I have to show you, but I have to say this. God has shown me that those who are married will be as they are not, and I have to say this. And if you guys got to kill me, you got to kill me, but I got to tell you what I'm hearing, what I'm being shown. You don't have to stay, but I got to say it. It's very interesting, a very interesting thing. So when we were attacked by the federal government, David had been talking about it, that it would happen for years. Nobody knew how it was going to happen, but it did. During the siege, when David is, trying to negotiate with the negotiators, and the tactical mariners are coming in and they're doing aggressive moves, that's solidifying us even more. We're seeing everything David said come true daily. So it's not just he said he was going to be attacked and then he was, but during the siege daily, we saw the FBI guys get on their tanks and moon us and give us the finger. And you're reading the book going, the pride and the arrogant rule the world, and the pride and the arrogant will fight against the anointed of God and will try to kill them and will try to take them. And you're like, wow, that's pretty proud and arrogant as far as I'm concerned. So spiritually, it became truer and truer and truer. So if I want to look at it spiritually, I could say this is the good fighting against the evil fighting against the good. It is who is the true God of this world. There's the God in heaven, and there's the God of this world. There's the evil and there's the good, and sometimes it's hard to know who's who, right? Like a lot of people spiritually blame Hollywood, they blame the movies, they blame music. There's so many things to blame for where society is going, but I don't know how to say this. During the siege, one of the biggest songs had to do with somebody's private parts getting satisfied. And you're just like, you kind of listen to songs like this and you're like, okay, well, Led Zeppelin was pretty radical. Beethoven was pretty radical. And his always music has been the force, right? But it just seems like we're going somewhere that's darker. We got TikTok, we got Facebook. Everyone's yelling at each other, but you're doing it from behind a keyboard, so you can't get slapped for some of the stuff you should probably get slapped for, right? You're hiding behind a keyboard, so we're seeing a different aspect of society. It's fascinating, but I think it's incredibly detrimental.
In terms of why the government was after them, if I'm remembering your book right, didn't you say that Ruby Ridge happened before this?
About 6 months before,
And I thought you wrote that the government needed a win. Their reputation was sullied by the way they handled that. So they thought they would do better with Waco, and obviously they didn't. But in terms of why did they attack it with such fervor, that might be a more humanistic reason as to why they went after it. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, sure. No, there's the political way to look at it. There's the spiritual. There's all kinds of different ways to look at this. I think that David Koresh, whether you like the guy or not, hate the guy or not, he was still 100% scriptural. He still had something, and he was fought against and destroyed. I mean, hated, whatever, all that. I get it. It's not and I told this to David earlier. If I were sitting in my house and I was listening to ABC, CBS, or NBC, or even CNN at that time, and I was listening to what they had to say, I'd be like, God, what a bunch of crazy whacks. I hope they just, I'd be that guy. I would have been just totally judgmental, but because I lived it, I can't be that guy. So now I can't be that guy ever. So I have to look at everything and every person, even if I think they're whack, it's like, okay, there might be another side. I don't know. Maybe they were beaten as a kid. Maybe I need to know the story before I judge this guy. So it becomes so complicated because you can't just rely on my incredibly sarcastic, stoic way of, like my dad was so sarcastic, great, fun stuff. So I love my father, he's wonderful. But my point is, we come from this kind of New England stoic sarcasm thing. And so, I have to realize that there's deeper reasons why people do stuff. It's rarely as cut and dry as you want to think it is.
Somebody who hadn't asked a question, anybody last questions? This is your time. He's not driving back from Maine anytime soon. He is going from here down to Mount Carmel. Just in 10 seconds, somebody asked the question about what Mount Carmel is today. What is it today? 10 seconds now.
All right, that's impossible. But today there's a former Davidian that studied under George that kind of came and started living on the land. He lived there for so many years that he made Clive's life miserable, who was also living on the land. Clive ended up leaving because he just couldn't deal with this individual anymore. He's kind of running the show because no one has really stood up to him. So because of the squatter right thing over 10 years, if no one challenging you, you kind of get the property. I can't afford an attorney to fight him. So he kind of is running Mount Carmel, and he's got all these terrible, I didn't notice him in the slideshow presentation, but he put these banners up saying that all these people are rotting in hell. He says that the kids were a sacrifice to God, which is absolutely ridiculous. He just says these horrendous things. People that go out there are often scared off by him. Now, if he's having a good day, I'm not trying to scare people off. Let me say this. People are very attracted. I can't go to the property anymore. Me and this guy Charlie have headed out. Right? He kicked me off, and I went on podcasts and called him out and said that this guy is claiming he's a survivor and he's taking money. And that's what I believe. At the same time, if you feel a powerful force leading you to go see Mount Carmel, I encourage you to go see Mount Carmel. You should honor that. Don't worry about Charlie, and don't worry about anything. I think he charges like $5 a carload or $5 to get in to see the property. It doesn't, listen, I'm not telling you not to give them money. Go see the property if you're compelled, that's fine. He claims it goes to the survivors. It doesn't. It goes to himself. He doesn't care about the survivors. He hates us. He thinks that we're following some religious whack job. Anyway, he's going to talk to God a lot, and he scares, I've seen him scare people. I've seen people run for the door when he said that the kids are child sacrifices to God. It's ridiculous. So, yeah, go see it. I'm not telling people not to see it, but just realize that none of the survivors like Heather or myself or anyone gets any money. It isn't. Well, it is if you're left alone to be with your thoughts and you're seeing the property yourself. It's an incredibly powerful thing. Just,
Somebody have a question over here?
just take it with a grain of salt what he actually says.
Oh, you mean you read my mind? As they say in the courtroom, do you want to make a summary statement?
Oh, there's one thing I want to say. Yeah, we are doing a memorial this year. It's the first memorial in over 2 years. They've all been Zoom. This one's going to be at the Helen Taylor Museum in Waco, the Waco Museum, Helen Taylor is called. April 19th starts at 10 a.m. We talk and have some lecturers speak. And then at 12:07 when the fire, or 12:09 when the fire begins, we will start to read the names. And we have a slideshow presentation where basically we just show the people. It's about the people that lost their lives. It's about the people who I consider to be martyrs. And we go through each person that died. We show their picture. We tell a little story about them. That's it.
Is it going to be streamed?
It's incredible. No, it's an incredible experience. It's an incredible experience.
It's not streamed?
Yes, it will be streamed on Zoom. We're streaming it through Kathy Wessinger is one of the just wonderful theologians, professors that have helped us every year with doing this, and we're streaming it through
If we went
university.
to your website, could we have access to that?
My website?
Waco Survivors?
This man has a question.
How accurate was the Netflix series? Were you happy with it?
Yeah, let me start from the beginning. The Netflix series was actually done from Paramount Networks. Originally, it was bought by Spike. Then Paramount Networks launched they bought out Spike and launched Paramount Networks on it. That was the first thing that they launched was the Waco series. I was happy with it in the sense that it humanized everyone, and it told Serenity's story, it told Michelle's story, Rachel's story. Wonderful. Many, 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 many people were left out that should have been included, but you can't. There's 130 people there. You can't include everyone and make a story make sense. They had my character do some incredibly heroic things that I didn't, that Greg Summers did. So I look great, but it's not really the case. But here's my point. I wrote a book about it. The book is the truth of my experience. They've embellished. They've took some dramatic liberties. But the important things are all true. The important things that happened did happen. They did take place. And if you read the book, you'll see the differences. Yeah. But I'm happy with it in the sense that it was, so far, I think, one of the more accurate things done, and it humanized the people, and I couldn't ask for more than that. I was thrilled about that.
Your final statement.
I'd like to know what David thought about it, though.
David Koresh, you mean?
Yeah, it would be interesting to know what he thought about it.
Do you have a Ouija board?
I don't play with that.
My final statement, I like the perspective of keeping an open mind to other people's religious beliefs, because to a lot of people, my religious beliefs as a Christian are wacko. And they were, in the first century, considered a cult from the Hebrew tradition, because this was an incredible departure from the Old Testament. And so being humble and loving, hard to go wrong.
It's a good statement to end on. What's the price of your book?
You get a lot cheaper through Amazon than through me, but you can't get it signed on Amazon. So it's $25 I do my books for signed.
Hurry back so they can sign it.